Chapter 16. Cessation raised his hand and released a water ball. Stimulated by the cold water, Keely groaned and struggled to open her eyes. An extremely ugly face came into her sight. Keely couldn't help screaming and retreated backward on all fours. "Miss Chi Li, don't be nervous. We're all friends," Han Jin said softly. Chi Li tilted her head and saw Han Jin. However, she did not look like a friend at all. Instead, she gritted her teeth and said, "It's you." Cough. "It's me." Han Jin coughed dryly. Chi Li glanced at Morrison's and the others. Suddenly, she thought of something and asked, "Where's Uncle Hoffman? Where's Uncle Hoffman?" Han Jin and Morrison's looked at each other. The situation was a little tricky. The soldiers had knocked out Chi Li and locked her in the cave. Obviously, the situation had reached a critical point. Chi Li should have some recollection of the situation. Not only would a lie not be able to gain Chi Li's trust, but it would also make Chi Li more cautious. "You have to calm down." Sunir saw Han Jin and Morrison's hesitation. She stepped forward and said softly, "You are the only survivor." Chi Li's body trembled. Then, she turned around and ran forward. Morrison stepped forward and blocked Chi Li's path. "Move!" Chi Li screamed. Morrison's avoided Chi Li's gaze because he felt guilty. "Miss Chi Li, it's not suitable for you. Really, get out of my way. Get out of my way." Keely shouted and pushed Moxing hard with her hands. Morrison still stood in front of Chi Li. The battlefield was too bloody. Chi Li's emotions were very unstable. If she was too agitated, the consequences would be unpredictable. Therefore, he could not move away. Chi Li's actions became more and more violent. In the end, she even started punching and kicking. However, Morrison's body was like a mountain. After a while, Morrison's was still fine. However, Chi Li was so tired that she staggered. "Miss Chi Li, right? Calm down." Sunir yelled. "What's the point of making such a scene? Can it make you forget the pain, or can it give your warriors a new life?" Chi Li suddenly turned around and stared at Sunir. "Did you just tell me that I'm the only survivor?" "Yes. They were willing to face death to protect me. Do you think I don't even have the courage to send them off?" Chi Li said word by word. Her voice was very calm. Or rather, she was trying her best to control herself. However, tears still fell from her eyes. Sunir was speechless. After a while, she smiled bitterly. "Morrison's, move away." "She's right." Morrison's looked at Han Jin for help. Han Jin sighed. "Let her go." Chi Li's question not only moved Sunir, it also moved Chi Li. If they didn't let Chi Li see them one last time, she might hate them for the rest of her life. She might even hate herself for the rest of her life. Morrison's stepped aside helplessly. Chi Li stumbled forward. Han Jin, Morrison's, and the others followed behind her. In fact, Chi Li was already mentally and physically exhausted. She had used up the last of her strength when she fought Morrison's. Sometimes, she would trip over rocks or branches on the ground. Other times, she would bump into tree trunks that she could easily avoid. Her struggling back made everyone's heart ache. Morrison's wanted to help Chi Li, but was stopped by Han Jin. They shouldn't disturb Chi Li now. The best way was to let her vent her emotions. Chi Li stumbled into the battlefield and finally stopped in front of the soldier who died together with the human-faced eagle. She knelt down on the ground. Her shoulders were shaking violently, but Han Jin and the others couldn't hear her crying. Chi Li didn't know that she was not only torturing herself, but also Morrison's. As for Han Jin, he was completely different. He was good at controlling his thoughts. When he thought that a thought would cause negative emotions, he could stop himself from thinking about it. Morrison's couldn't do that. The more Chi Li cried, the more he blamed himself and felt bad. But he could only bear it silently. Han Jin knew that it couldn't go on like this. He walked slowly to the headless body, looked at it carefully for a while, and sneered deliberately. "What did you find?" Sunir walked over, followed by Morrison's and Sasson. This man was not killed by the human-faced eagle. It was impossible for the eagle to bite off half of his head. Han Jin said slowly, "Did you see his wound?" Only when he was attacked by a large blunt weapon or hit by a heavy object, he would become like this. Sunir looked closer and frowned. "You mean someone attacked them?" I thought so too. Han Jin's eyes gradually became cold. I saw Miss Chi Li. I finally know who the murderer is. Who? Morrison's asked anxiously. You and I both know him. Morrison's was stunned. He suddenly remembered the large blunt weapon attack that Han Jin just said. Is it the dwarf forging master named Viller? The forging hammer in Viller's hand could cause this kind of damage. That's him. Han Jin sighed. Traitors can't be trusted. Since he can betray you once, he will betray you a second time and a third time. Miss Chi Li is too soft-hearted. If it were me, I would never let Viller go. What's more, Viller was forced to become a slave in the end. His heart was full of resentment. How could he be loyal? Of course, he would find an opportunity to bite back at his master. That beast! Morrison's roared angrily. I will never forgive him. I won't forgive him either. Han Jin said slowly. Seeing Morrison's emotions found a vent, he finally felt relieved. A dwarf forging master? How could he hurt a warrior? Sunir didn't believe it. He is not only a forging master, but also a high-grade combat dwarf. Han Jin replied. Even if he is a high-grade combat dwarf, isn't it a bit arbitrary for you to conclude that he did it based on these things? Sunir said, what if it's not him? It's very simple. After Miss Chi Li's mood stabilizes, ask her if Viller is in the team. Everything will be clear, and I have carefully checked all the places. I'm sure that there are no dwarf corpses here. Han Jin said lightly. Also, don't forget that I am a prophet. Although I can't see the future clearly, I believe in my intuition. Han Jin had already said this, and Sunir could not refute it. She turned her eyes elsewhere. Sunir, I feel, you seem to have a special affection for dwarves. Han Jin said lightly. Oh, Sunir's eyes changed a little, but she soon recovered her calmness. You are wrong. I am just a very serious person. P.S. There is one more chapter at 1 o'clock. Chapter 17. Everyone was busy. Morrison's, Sesu, and Stillberg were busy burying the corpses. Out of respect for the dead, at least to make Chi Li feel at ease, they had to set up tombstones for the dead. Sunir was busy comforting Chi Li, and Han Jin was busy revising anatomy. There were 50 or 60 corpses of human-faced eagles left at the scene. Han Jin dissected them one by one, looking for possible magic crystals. It only took him one sentence to describe the whole process, but it took Han Jin 2 hours to do it. Finally, he found 7 water blue magic crystals in his hand. The biggest one was as big as a baby's fist, crystal clear, and very beautiful. The other magic crystals were as big as a pigeon's egg and were not as heavy as that one. Then Han Jin chopped a pile of branches and threw a human-faced eagle into the bonfire. He was into a very important scientific experiment. The appearance of a human-faced eagle was very strange. Except for a long, sharp beak, the rest of its body was similar to that of human beings, especially the eyebrows and eyes, which were almost identical. Therefore, the human-faced eagle's eyesight was notoriously bad among the birds. Moreover, the human-faced eagle had a smooth and round neck. No one could tell that it was a human-faced eagle just by looking at its neck. The human-faced eagle that died together with the warrior even had an Adam's apple. The best magic crystal was obtained from the body of the human-faced eagle. Han Jin saw it clearly when he dissected it, and he had goosebumps all over his body. In fact, it was not in accordance with biological evolution. When flying at high altitude, the strong wind would greatly accelerate the loss of heat. Birds all needed the protection of feathers. Of course, the knowledge that Han Jin mastered might not be in accordance with here. After all, it was a different world. Roasting the human-faced eagle gave Han Jin a feeling of burning people. He resisted the nausea, tore a piece of meat from the cooked human-faced eagle, put it in his mouth, and chewed it gently. That's right. That's right. With the same weight, the energy provided by the flesh of back-feathered lizard was about 10 times more than that of bread. However, the energy provided by the flesh of human-faced eagle was dozens of times more than that of back-feathered lizard. However, the meat of the human-faced eagle was too unpalatable and too tough. Due to his special cultivation method and body modification, he now had a pair of unparalleled teeth. However, it was still difficult for him to chew the meat of the human-faced eagle. Han Jin's gaze fell onto the magic crystals. The 6 small magic crystals each had around 100 jia worth of energy. The best magic crystal had around 1,000 jia worth of energy. If he could eat all of these magic crystals, his energy would be comparable to Morrison's. Unfortunately, he didn't dare to eat a single piece. He couldn't eat it either. These magic crystals weren't just for him, they were for everyone. Regardless of whether it was a big or small matter, Han Jin was not a person who would make mistakes easily, even though he needed energy very much. "Raphael, come here," Morrison shouted. Han Jin turned his head and glanced at Morrison's. He tore off a large piece of meat and put it in his mouth. Then he stood up and walked to Morrison's. Morrison's had finished his work. He and Sasu were sitting in a semicircle on the grass. It seemed that they were discussing something. Sunir was also there. "What's the matter?" Han Jin asked as he sat down. Miss Chi has cried and fainted several times. She can't go on with the journey. "Unless we leave her here." "We can't leave either," Sasu said. "Then stay here," Han Jin said. In fact, he didn't want to leave at all. He hadn't absorbed the energy of the human-faced eagles yet. It was too wasteful. Someone sent him a pillow when he wanted to sleep, which was exactly what he wanted. "Anyway, I'm fine." "Morrison's, what about you?" "I'm fine too." Han Jin looked at Sasu. Sasu smiled and said, "I'm a bard. In the past few years, I've been wandering from city to city. I don't care. If you want me to stay, I'll stay." "Sunir, what about you?" Han Jin asked. At this time, it's not a bad thing to stay in the forest. Sunir smiled. "At this time? Sunir, are you deliberately hiding something?" Han Jin said slowly, "Of course, if you don't want to tell me, just pretend that I didn't ask." "I can tell you that a war is about to break out," Sunir said softly. "War? There are wars all the time on this continent, right?" Sasu laughed. "Sunir, you're very humorous. It's not an ordinary war." Sunir's face turned cold. "Lord Zagund of the Black Raven City and Lord Malish of the Depew City have formed an alliance and jointly attacked the Holy Crown City. It won't be long before we all become slaves of the Dark Forces." "Ha! Sunir, you're too pessimistic. The Holy Crown City and the Wild Willow City are also allies. If the elves of the Wild Willow City send troops to support them, Zagund and Malish won't have any advantages." Morrison's shook his head. "That's the problem. The Wild Willow City has refused the request of the Holy Crown City to dismark Lord Malish." Sunir said coldly. "How is that possible?" Morrison's was stunned. "Why not? Zagund and Malish released all the elven slaves and prisoners of war and signed a permanent non-aggression treaty with the Wild Willow City. Absurd. How could they believe such an absurd thing?" Morrison's jumped up. "Malish is still okay, but Zagund is a butcher. If the Holy Crown City collapses, the Wild Willow City will be the next. Are those elves stupid? In fact, the Wild Willow City has passed the referendum and approved the decision of the elders." Sunir's eyes flashed with an imperceptible sadness, and then she turned her eyes to the other side. "Stupid, stupid, they're really stupid." Morrison still couldn't believe the decision of the Wild Willow City. The result of this war would directly affect their lives. In the past, when the lords confronted each other, no one could completely defeat the other, so they didn't dare to go too far in order to expand their population and strengthen their strength. Even the most ruthless and murderous Zagund was restricted to a certain extent. If Zagund won the war, he would be invincible and would have no more scruples. His nature would pour out, and he might even turn this place into a purgatory. "I've been to the Wild Willow City, and I know some of their thoughts," Sasu whispered. "The elves are a peace-loving race, and they are extremely disgusted and afraid of war. The hundreds of years of war have completely crushed their will, so they would rather believe in an absurd agreement than join the war." "Then why haven't the humans been crushed?" Han Jin asked. "You know, the elves have a very long lifespan, and they can't be compared with the humans." Sasu smiled. "When the human warriors hate war, they're already very old, or they don't even have time to hate war, and they die on the battlefield. They can leave, because the new and hot-blooded youngsters will take their place. The elves have a lifespan of thousands of years, can you imagine? An elf who has been fighting on the battlefield for more than 200 years. How tired will he be? It can even be said that they are on the verge of collapse, and it's a total collapse. Sunir suddenly bit her lips, but looking at her eyes, it was clear that she understood everything that Sasu said. Not to mention the peace-loving elves. Even for us, can we persist on the battlefield for more than 200 years and still maintain our fighting spirit? Your family, your friends, and your companions have fallen on the battlefield. You have seen countless deaths, and you have tasted countless joys and sorrows. Then, can you really maintain your fighting spirit? Sasu slowly said, besides, in these 200 years, not a single elf has died of old age, and almost all of them have died on the battlefield. Do you know what this means for a race? Han Jin bitterly smiled. If the elves of the Wild Willow City had persisted on the battlefield for more than 200 years, then no matter what they did, they couldn't be blamed. If it was him, Han Jin, he wouldn't be able to bear it either. In comparison, the humans had a strong advantage. They had a fast metabolism, and they always had fresh blood injected into them to maintain their vitality. Everyone fell into silence. After all, they were insignificant people, and they couldn't resist fate. They could only passively accept it, whether the future was dark or bright. Chapter 18. Han Jin wanted to cry but failed to shed a tear. He was in pain, but no one here could understand his pain. Han Jin was a cook in a diner for the whole night. He ate 3 human-faced eagles, and the energy he absorbed was even more than the total energy he had accumulated since he came to this world. At dawn, Han Jin was a little tired. He wanted to have a rest first, and then continue his great undertaking of absorbing energy. At this time, Han Jin was very happy because he saw and grasped the hope. But when he opened his eyes, everything had changed. During his sleep, Moxink, Cessation, and the others had burned all the corpses of the human-faced eagles. For Han Jin, those corpses were treasures, but for them, they were of no use at all. What's more, the wooden shed they built was not far away from here, and none of them wanted to stay with the corpses that would definitely become rotten. A man became a millionaire in his sleep, with many wives and concubines and money like dirt. But when he opened his eyes, he found that he had nothing. How sad it was. Han Jin almost went crazy. The only thing that made him feel lucky was that he never left the good things until the end. The largest human-faced eagle had become his energy. Otherwise, he would have gone to fight Morrison's. Come on, what are you thinking about? Sunir greeted Han Jin. Everyone felt a little strange. In the past, Han Jin was most interested in eating, but now he was sitting on the hillside like a statue. Han Jin barely controlled his impulse to speak rudely. After all, Sunir greeted him with good intentions. He went down step by step and sat lazily beside Morrison's. Morrison's bumped Han Jin with his shoulder and asked curiously, "What's wrong with you today?" "Nothing," Han Jin replied listlessly. He was thinking about whether he should tell them his secret in order to avoid similar situations happening again. But could he really trust them? No, there must be something wrong. Morrison said. Han Jin ignored Morrison's. He took out a cloth bag and threw it on the ground. "Take a look. This is what we got yesterday." Sasu opened the pouch and poured out a few aqua blue magic crystals. He frowned and said, "You can't keep the magic crystals like this. Magic crystals are very unstable. If something happens, it's fine if the magic crystal is destroyed, but what if you get hurt by the explosion? Then what should we do? We should keep the magic crystals separately." "It can't be." Han Jin pointed at Stillberg and said, "He still has a few hundred magic crystals from the Black Ravens. Why didn't you say so?" "It's not the same. The higher the grade of the magic crystal, the more unstable the elements are." Sasu shook his head. "If you trust me, then give it to me for safekeeping," Sunir said calmly. Sasu handed the magic crystals to her. Sunir had the interspatial ring, so she was the best candidate. No one had any objection. "Sasu, How much can these magic crystals be sold for? Han Jin asked. That magic crystal of the highest grade should be sold for 20 to 50 gold coins. The other magic crystals together can be sold for more than 10 gold coins. Is there such a big difference? Han Jin was a little surprised. Yes. Sassoon nodded. Didn't Sunir say yesterday that the price of magic crystals will skyrocket because of the war? Han Jin said. Anyway, we have nothing to do now. Why don't we take turns to go hunting and try to accumulate more magic crystals? Money's a good thing. No matter if we go to the Bite Man or the Holy Crown City, or even if we want to leave this place, at least we have to ensure our livelihood. I'm fine with anything. Whatever you say, Sassu said. I'm a mercenary. This is my old profession. Morrison's laughed. Okay, Sunia replied. She looked very calm. No one knew whether she was looking down on the magic crystals or the work of hunting holy animals. Sasso, if we all buy a space ring, how much will it cost? Han Jin asked. Sunir burst into laughter. Sassu said helplessly, Do you really have this idea? Why? If we can have this kind of harvest every day. Sassu pointed at the magic crystal in Sunir's hand. About 3 years. Sunir, you're so rich. Han Jin's eyes lit up. For him, money was an inexhaustible source of energy. I don't have money. This space ring was given to me by my mother. Sunir shook her head. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here with you. It's all the same. Morrison suddenly said, I have a way to make a fortune. What is it? Han Jin immediately perked up. We can contact Sunir's family and tell them that Sunir is in our hands. We can ask them to pay a ransom. Morrison's observed Sunir's expression as he spoke. Of course, our goal is to make the business a success. As for the price, it can't be too excessive. Morrison's, are you crazy? Sassu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You can't joke around like this. Sure, if you're not afraid of my brother's Goth's bow, I can cooperate with you. Sunir was still as calm as ever. Then forget it. I can tell that you're a hypocrite. You're an interesting person. You want to blackmail my family, but you want me to help you sincerely? Sunir smiled. You can't say that. You'll have a share of the money we earn. It's good for everyone. The point is, why should I share the money with you? I can ask my brother for myself. Sunir couldn't help but roll her eyes. Okay, let's be serious. Sassu interrupted. Let's talk about hunting. Raphael and the other two can't fight. How are we going to split the 3 of us? You and Morrisons can go together. I can do it myself. Sunir said softly. You guys go out first today. I'll stay in the camp. Chili's emotions are still unstable. I can take care of her. I'll go out tomorrow. Sassu and Morrisons looked at each other. It turned out that Han Jin's judgment was reasonable. When they first met, Sunir said that she was a treasure hunter in a 5th grade profession. However, her opinion was somewhat unfair. Morrison's was a high-grade swordsman in a 6th grade profession. He should go alone. Sunir should go with Sassu. The 2 5th grade professions should take care of each other. Sunir's opinion meant that she had enough confidence in herself. That's it. Morrison stood up and picked up the greatsword. What about me? I don't have to do anything. Han Jin pointed at his nose. We're not so desperate that we need the prophet to fight. Sassu laughed. There's another chapter in the afternoon. Chapter 19. After dinner, Sunir went back to take care of Chili. Morrisons waited until Sunir's figure disappeared before he turned to Sassu. You're too stupid. Huh? Sunir and I were discussing how to get rich. Why did you interrupt? How can you joke like that? Sassu smiled bitterly. You. Morrison's face was full of arrogance. We can all see that Sunir's background is very mysterious. Other than that, we don't know anything else. You think I'm joking? I'm trying to get information from her. Get information from her? Of course. Morrisons nodded heavily. At least now we know that she has a brother, and that she uses the Geddon's bow, which is unique to the elves. If you didn't interrupt just now, I might have already known her parents and her brother's name. Forget it, Morrisons. Han Jin lazily interrupted. Don't think that you're smart, and don't treat others as fools. If you continue to ask, Sunir will definitely realize your intentions. That's not good. It's better to ask her directly. Would she tell me if I asked her directly? Morrison's was unconvinced. It's her right to tell us. We have to respect her. Han Jin shook his head. Let's use you as an example. If I try to find out something that you don't want to talk about, will you feel good? Morrison scratched his head. After a while, he smiled embarrassedly. I didn't expect you to be so smart. Sasso looked at Morrison's from head to toe. He never knows how to use his little tricks. Han Jin stood up. Stillberg, give me the magic crystal. Stillberg was stupidly listening to everyone's conversation. When he heard Han Jin calling him, he hurriedly handed over the big bag behind him. Han Jin opened the bag and carefully picked out a magic crystal with the least energy. Then he handed the bag to Stillberg and turned to walk into the forest. Young master, where are you going? Stillberg asked. I have something to do. Don't disturb me. Han Jin waved his hand. Han Jin came to a small valley. He looked around for a while, then reached out his hands to climb up the tree in front of him. About 10 meters above the ground, there was a small hole in the tree, which was just big enough for Han Jin and suitable for his practice. Yesterday, Han Jin had spent a lot of effort to find this place. The dense forest under his feet was close to the periphery of the Terasha Mountains. Even in the daytime, there were often demon beasts. The dozens of human-faced eagles that came for revenge were a warning that could not be ignored. It was much safer in the tree than under the tree. Han Jin stared at the magic crystal in his hand. After a long while, he put the magic crystal in his mouth in a very slow movement. Han Jin was a calm person, but he could not be absolutely calm. Although he had some experience of fighting with wits and courage, he was still very young. His understanding and cognition were very limited. The most important thing was that he did not have any heart to erase painful lessons. As for the explosion that sent him here, it was mostly because he was wavering. He could either be a good person and not take on Zhou Qingyi's case, or he could be a bad person and kill or subdue Zhou Qingyi. That way, the explosion would not have happened. The blow in the morning made Han Jin a little out of control. If he ate a few more human-faced eagles and absorbed the energy of hundreds of black raven magic crystals, his total energy would reach about 4 jia. According to the standard of this world, he was already a third-grade professional. Compared with Morrison's and others, there was still a considerable gap, but he had only been in this world for a few days. No one could compete with him in terms of leaps and bounds. Now the human-faced eagles had been burned up by Morrison's. If he continued to practice steadily according to the original plan, it would take at least 1 more month or even longer to try to absorb the energy of the black raven magic crystals, or wait for Morrison's to bring back a few 5th-grade demon beasts. But now Han Jin did not want to wait, nor did he want to pin his hope on anyone. Han Jin slowly swallowed the magic crystal. He calculated clearly that there were more than 7,000 yuan of energy in his body, and the energy of this magic crystal was more than 80 yuan. On the surface, it was more than 1% of the energy, but the energy in the magic crystal was not pure, and there were some things that he did not understand for the time being, so the energy base had to be discounted. However, Han Jin also knew that the real safe standard was 1 in 1,000. The so-called limit meant that the closer the energy ratio was to 1%, the more dangerous it would be. When he sensed that the energy of the magic crystal began to dissolve, Han Jin slowly closed his eyes and concealed his spirit and qi. Soon, he really understood why Sasu said that the elements of the magic crystal were very unstable. At the beginning, the energy was consciously guided out by him, but soon it became a flood. The magic crystal in the size of a fingernail disappeared in the blink of an eye, and all of it was transformed into a turbulent flow of energy, crazily hitting his limbs and bones. Fortunately, he had greatly strengthened his body, otherwise he would have suffered internal injuries. Too reckless. A thought flashed through Han Jin's mind, but now he had no time to regret. Han Jin took a deep breath, and the energy in his body slowly revolved, absorbing a part of the impact with every revolution. The energy in the magic crystal was different from the grain essence contained in food. The grain essence was gentle and docile, and he could control the speed of absorption at any time. The energy contained in the magic crystal was very wild, rampaging and uncontrollable, and the speed of release was too fast, which made Han Jin feel that he was unprepared. After a few revolutions, Han Jin's state of mind suddenly had a drastic change. The negative emotions contained in the dark elements, such as brutality, bloodthirstiness, hatred, rushed into his mind. Han Jin's face became red, the veins on his forehead bulged, and his hands in front of his chest began to tremble slightly. One illusion after another flashed through Han Jin's mind. The illusion was full of dark colors, but made Han Jin feel very comfortable. Han Jin saw that he waved an iron rod and beat Morrison's black and blue, because Morrison's took the initiative to burn all the human-faced eagles, which made him hate him very much. Han Jin saw that he pushed Chi Li down on the grass and tore off all of Chi Li's clothes. Her crying, gasping, and pleading made him very satisfied. Sasu and Sunir, in Han Jin's mind, everyone became his slaves. In the system of cultivation, all kinds of negative emotions were collectively called inner demons. After all, Han Jin was a mature cultivator, and he was not afraid of the influence of inner demons. The problem was that he was not prepared in advance, and before he was alert, the inner demons had already taken control of him. Han Jin used the last bit of his intelligence to make a long howl, trying to vent all the inner demons, but the howl soon turned into a roar full of brutality. Chapter 20. A figure jumped from tree to tree, quickly approaching the tree hole Han Jin was hiding in. It was Sunir, who had heard the long howl. The place Han Jin had chosen was very hidden, but that was only for magical beasts. Sunir only paused for a moment to determine the exact location. With a few leaps, she steadily appeared in front of the tree hole. The scene in the tree hole shocked Sunir. She could vaguely recognize Han Jin's face, but his face had swelled up and was covered with countless earthworm-like blood vessels. His eyes were tightly shut, the veins on his forehead were bulging, and his cheeks were twitching violently. He looked like a barbarian who had fallen into a state of madness. A few dozen yuan's worth of energy wasn't much, but the damage it caused when it was out of control was far beyond Han Jin's expectations. It was like an integrated motherboard. Under normal circumstances, it could withstand a considerable amount of electric current. If the electric arc from the outside didn't follow the prescribed path and forced its way in, it would cause serious damage to the motherboard, just like Han Jin's current body. Of course, Han Jin's body was much stronger than a lifeless motherboard. At least he could try his best to absorb a portion of the energy. The problem was he could only reduce the damage, but he couldn't fundamentally resist it. Raphael, what's wrong with you? Sunir hurriedly reached out to push Han Jin. Hearing Sunir's voice, Han Jin suddenly opened his eyes. His pupils had unknowingly turned blood red. At the same time, he reached out his hand and grabbed Sunir's blonde hair. In fact, Sunir was the strongest professional in this temporary group. However, after interacting with each other for a few days, there was more or less trust between them. Moreover, Han Jin was just a prophet who didn't have any combat ability. Sunir was caught off guard and was caught red-handed by Han Jin. Just as Sunir was extremely surprised and was about to open her mouth to question Han Jin forcefully pulled downwards. His other hand reached out and grabbed the soft armor on Sunir's chest and then forcefully tore it apart. At this moment, Han Jin's mind was filled with nothing but brutality. There was no rationality left. Sunir was in so much pain that tears were about to flow out. She instinctively swung her right fist toward Han Jin's chest. With a loud bang, Han Jin's chest clearly caved in. His body crashed into the tree hole, creating a large hole. He couldn't help but roll downwards. However, his hand was still tightly holding on his Sunir's hair. Reality proved that this kind of street thug's fighting style had a certain degree of effectiveness. Perhaps it was to protect her hair, or perhaps it was because of the unbearable pain. Sunir was forced to pass through the tree hole and fall down together with Han Jin. However, Sunir wasn't idle. Her fist rained down on Han Jin's chest like a storm. Fortunately, she couldn't borrow any strength from the air. Sunir wasn't a warrior, so she couldn't release her Do Chi. The strength she could exert was very limited. Otherwise, Hanjin would have been beaten to death in the process of falling. With a plop, the two of them fell onto the grass one after the other. First, he was punched more than 10 times. Then, he violently collided with the ground. Hanjin's injuries were even more serious. He opened his mouth and a stream of blood spurted out, spraying on his Sunir's face. Sunir was shocked. She thought that she had fallen into some kind of trap. She pulled out an arrow from her quiver and forcefully pierced it towards Hanjin's forehead. At this moment, Sunir was already filled with killing intent. When Hanjin was heavily injured, sweet blood gushed up from his throat. The rampaging energy and all kinds of negative emotions in his body all found an outlet. After all, they didn't belong to Hanjin. As he spat out a mouthful of blood, his mind recovered. However, his injuries couldn't be reversed. Hanjin couldn't even move a finger. He could only watch as the tip of the arrow pierced towards him. At this critical moment, Sunir's furious gaze collided with Hanjin's. She suddenly realized that the blood-red color in Hanjin's eyes had faded. In Hanjin's eyes, she saw a deep helplessness and despair. Sunir's heart skipped a beat. Her arms suddenly stopped moving. Even so, the tip of the arrow had already pierced through Hanjin's forehead. Drops of blood slowly seeped out. "Raphael," Sunir called out tentatively. "It's me," Hanjin replied in a low voice. He didn't dare to nod his head. The tip of the arrow was still stuck in between his eyebrows. "What happened just now?" Sunir didn't let down her guard. "My leg. It seems like my leg is broken. My ribs are also broken." Hanjin's face was full of pain. He tried to change the topic and use his pain to gain Sunir's sympathy. "Tell me, what happened just now?" Sunir said coldly. Seeing that he couldn't move Sunir, Hanjin fell into silence. He couldn't explain. A hasty lie wouldn't stand up to scrutiny. Moreover, Sunir wasn't stupid. She would be even more suspicious. "Speak. My patience is limited." Sunir's hand moved. Hanjin smiled bitterly. Did he have to tell her his secret? Stilberg said that you took a black raven's magic crystal from him and left. Sunir suddenly remembered the dark aura that Hanjin had revealed. She vaguely felt that she had grasped something. "Where's the magic crystal? Where is it?" "I ate it," Hanjin said in a low voice. "You ate it?" Sunir raised her eyebrows. "Because I can absorb the elements in the magic crystal." Hanjin wanted to say energy, but Sunir might not understand. "What did you say? You can absorb the elements in the magic crystal?" Sunir was stunned. Her voice began to tremble. "Yes. You can absorb all kinds of elements?" "Yes. Eat it." Sunir flipped her hand, and a fiery red magic crystal appeared in her hand. Hanjin's pupils suddenly shrank. That was a grade 6 magic crystal. The energy contained in it was about a few thousand units. If he could really absorb the energy in it, he would become a grade 6 professional. "I'll die if I eat it." Sunir sneered. She tightened her grip on the arrow. "Oh, why?" "It's impossible for an ant to drink all the water in a river. Right now, I can at most absorb the elements of a grade 2 magic crystal. After a period of accumulation, I can try to absorb the elements of a grade 3 magic crystal. I have to do it step by step." Sunir stopped sneering and looked at Hanjin seriously. Hanjin's expression was very magnanimous. He had even told her his most important secret. What else was there to hide? After a long time, Sunir said word by word, "If what you said is true, do you know what it means?" "What?" Hanjin asked humbly. "Your future is limitless. I don't know what will happen in the future, but I thought today was my limit." Hanjin joked reluctantly. Sunir didn't laugh. She was silent for a while and said slowly, "I've never heard of anyone with such a terrifying talent. You believe me?" "Somewhat." Sunir paused for a second and continued, "You emitted a strong smell of darkness just now, but it's gone now. I think there's only one reasonable explanation. You can really absorb the elements in magic crystals. Then can you raise your hand a little?" "I'm a bit dizzy." Hanjin smiled bitterly. From a cultivator's point of view, the space between the eyebrows was where the sky I was located. Not to mention an arrow, even a finger or a pencil would make people feel very uncomfortable. Do you know what your talent means, or not? Sunir asked seriously. She hated people who didn't know they were in a mountain of treasures and always changed the topic. I know, but I need magic crystals and time. Hanjin couldn't help but say seriously. Otherwise, everything is just a fantasy. These were the words that Hanjin said from the bottom of his heart. I have one last question. Why did you absorb the elements in the dark magic crystal? Sunir's expression relaxed a bit. Can't you absorb all kinds of elements? I only have this kind of magic crystal. Oh. Sunir nodded. Her eyes fell on Hanjin's left leg. Her expression suddenly became a bit unnatural. Your injury, is it very painful? Sister, you finally sympathize with me? Hanjin was so moved that he almost shed tears. It hurts. It's all my fault. It's not your fault. It's my fault. I didn't think that the dark element would have such a big effect. I couldn't control myself at all. In the future, don't ever absorb the dark element again. Otherwise, you'll turn into a dark creature sooner or later. Sunir showed a trace of hatred. She didn't dislike Hanjin, but she hated the dark aura. I know. Okay, I'll take you back. Sunir bent down and tried to carry Hanjin. No, let Stillberg do it. Can he take you back? Aren't you afraid that your injury will worsen? Sunir said with a smile that wasn't a smile. I'm not afraid. Why are you still so shy? There's another chapter in the afternoon. Chapter 21. Misfortune may be a blessing in disguise. Hanjin was lying on the straw bed in boredom, watching Qi Li and Stillberg busying themselves. Cherry recovered quickly. In other words, she was a strong woman, but she lacked the courage and experience to face the danger directly. Hanjin and the others didn't leave her alone, and Qi Li appreciated it. Although Hanjin and the others often talked about how beautiful the forest scenery was, Qi Li wasn't that stupid, and her hostility gradually faded away. Qi Li was also a professional, a regular fighter, but she could only defeat Stillberg and couldn't even defeat the injured Hanjin. Knowing that she couldn't do anything else, Qi Li and Stillberg worked together to do some chores, such as washing and cleaning. It was really hard for her. Because of Qi Li, her efficiency and effect were not very good. Obviously, she had never done such chores before. As a lady of the Holy Crown City, she had many servants and maids, so she didn't need to do anything. Now, she was forced to do something. Of course, Hanjin and the others didn't force her, but she forced herself. Sometimes Hanjin asked Stillberg to take over her chores, but she was always very unhappy. Over time, Hanjin and the others just let her do whatever she wanted. Hanjin spat out the grass roots in his mouth and turned his eyes to the ceiling. A few days ago, Qi Li dragged him down, and now he was the one who dragged him down. 4 of his ribs were broken, and his left leg was fractured. He couldn't go anywhere. The worst thing was that he was worried about his energy. In order to avoid any sequelae, he had to use energy to strengthen the recovery ability of his body. After all, he didn't have enough energy. When he was at his peak, he could recover from this injury in 12 hours. However, the energy consumption was proportional to the recovery, and Hanjin couldn't afford it now. Sunir, you're back. Morrison's voice came from outside the shed. Wow, you brought back a big guy. Who wants to clean up? I'm a bit tired. Sunir replied. I'll do it. Morrison said they can't do it. Where's Raphael? Is he still in the shed? Yes. Morrison's laughed weirdly. Sunir, you seem to care about him a lot these days. It's none of your business. Sunir lifted the straw curtain and walked in before her voice died away. Hanjin raised his head and looked at Sunir. Even though Morrison's was teasing her, Sunir's eyes were calm. She didn't take Morrison's words to heart. This was their secret. Hanjin's injury was all thanks to Sunir. To them, it was natural and normal to take care of and be taken care of. Otherwise, one of them would feel wronged, and the other would feel guilty. Stillberg, go out for a while. I have something to tell him, Sunir said calmly. Stillberg's eyes suddenly lit up. He looked at Hanjin, then looked at Sunir, and walked out of the shed with a smile. This guy, his smile is too vulgar. I'll have to teach him a lesson later. Han Jin said awkwardly. Vulgar? I don't think you're any worse. Sunia replied as she walked to Han Jin and squatted down. Soon, a few magic crystals appeared beside Han Jin. There were fire, earth, and water elemental magic crystals. This is... Han Jin was stunned. For you, Sunir said calmly. Han Jin discovered that these magic crystals were all tier 2 magic crystals. He immediately understood Sunir's intention. When Sunir was hunting for food, she also hunted some tier 2 magic beasts for him. The probability of tier 2 magic beasts forming magic crystals was very low. Sasu burned so many black crows that day, but he only got 200 to 300 magic crystals. Moreover, the magic crystals in front of him were all different. God knows how long Sunir had spent in the forest for these magic crystals. Thank you, Han Jin said softly, but what? I'm injured now, and the accumulated elements have been greatly consumed. Sunir, I think you understand. You can't absorb the elements of tier 2 magic crystals now. Yes, Han Jin nodded. Tier 1 magic crystals? That's not easy. Sunir frowned and said, Is there no other way? Actually, if you didn't burn those human-faced eagles, I wouldn't have become like this. Han Jin smiled bitterly. He finally vented out the resentment that he had been suppressing for days. You mean, you can still absorb the elements from the bodies of magic beasts? Sunir was shocked. Yes, but the absorption is very small. No wonder you always eat so much. Sunir suddenly realized. I don't want to. In fact, it's very hard to eat all day long. Sunir was stunned for a while, and suddenly said, Then I have a way. After that, she turned and walked out of the wooden shed. Not long after, Morrison's scream came from outside. What? Bear of Earth? Sunir, are you crazy? What are you shouting for? Sunir said angrily. I saw it clearly. It's just a bear that hasn't reached adulthood yet. The two of us can deal with it. I don't want to be crazy with you. So what if it hasn't reached adulthood yet? What if there are other bears nearby? Sunir, it's a tier 8 magic beast. It's not something we can deal with. Can't we observe carefully? If there are other bears around, we can come back. If there aren't. No, Morrison said firmly. Are you going or not? Sunir was a little angry. No. Moxing's answer was very quick. Sunir whispered a few words to Morrison's. Morrison said in surprise, Are you serious? Do I have to lie to you? Morrison's hesitated for a while and said reluctantly, All right, let's try. That's a real man. Ha! Are you cursing me? My teacher said that real men usually die quickly. You. Sunir was speechless. Sasu, you stay here. Sunir and I will go out for a walk. We'll be back soon. Morrison said, Hey, are you really going to deal with the bear? Sasu asked anxiously. It's okay. Morrison's voice was already far away. Wait for our good news. Han Jin was lying there in a daze. He heard the conversation outside, and he also heard the key words. He also knew why Morrison's had changed his mind. Han Jin's eyes were a little wet. He was a very competitive person. In his previous world, he did not accept anyone's help other than his parents and master. In this world, he still refused to ask for help from others. He only wanted to rely on himself. However, some things could not be rejected. Young master, what's wrong with you? Steelberg exclaimed at the door of the wooden shed. I'm fine. Han Jin closed his eyes. I want to sleep for a while. Don't disturb me. Chapter 22. Han Jin had a good sleep, for he had already accepted Moxink and the others in his heart. He trusted them with his safety, and he felt relieved. It was not until Steelberg pushed Han Jin a few times that Han Jin woke up. When he opened his eyes, he saw Sunir and Steelberg in the wooden shed. Steelberg was holding a piece of barbecued meat in his hand. Han Jin woke up and reached out to take the meat. Steelberg smiled and said, Young master, let me feed you. No, I'm not that weak. Han Jin put his elbow on the ground and said, Just help me up. Steelberg did not insist. He carefully supported Han Jin's back. Han Jin took a bite of the meat and was stunned. Is this the meat of the bear of the earth? No. Sunir shook her head. There was an old female bear near the cub. Morrison's, and I did not dare to provoke them. That's right. Don't risk your lives for me, or else. Han Jin smiled bitterly. You wish. Who do you think you are? Sunir smiled. If I can help you, it's okay. But if I have to risk my life, I won't do it. Han Jin was a bit embarrassed. Then this is elk meat. Why? You don't want to eat it? No, I'm satisfied as long as I have food. Han Jin made a happy face. At this moment, Morrison's opened the curtain and walked in. Sunir, do you have any more grade 5 magic crystals? Yes. Sunir turned her hand, and a few blue magic crystals appeared in her hand. They were all taken by Han Jin from the human-faced eagle. No, Sasu wants fire magic crystals. I don't have any fire elemental ones. Then what do we do? Morrison's eyes widened. Your trap alone is useless. I'll talk to you guys later. Don't disturb Raphael's rest. Sunir gave Han Jin a look with her back facing him. Oh, Moxink nodded as if he understood. He turned around and walked outside, but stopped after 2 steps. By the way, Cessation asked me if I could lend him your soft armor to have a look. What is he trying to do? Sunir asked with a frown. Your soft armor is too strong. Sasu knows a little about alchemy, so he wants to study it. Morrison's laughed. Huh, if all of us have this kind of soft armor, what are we afraid of? Sunir's soft armor is indeed very sturdy. Han Jin nodded. How did you know? Morrison's asked curiously. Han Jin had been thinking about a few sentences in his mind. Do you have any more grade 5 magic crystals? Sasu needs, trap, and so on. When he heard Morrison's question, he answered without thinking. I tried to tear it apart a few times, but there was no. Ha! Before he could finish, Han Jin had already realized that something was wrong. He could only laugh dryly. Don't talk about your strength. Morrison's laughed. Even the earthen bear. Why do you have so much to say? Sunir yelled. No one knew what had happened while Han Jin was sleeping, but his attitude towards Sunir had changed. If it had been yesterday, he would have lost his temper on the spot if Sunir had talked to him in such a tone. Okay, I'll stop. Morrison's suddenly froze. Raphael, what did you just say? You said you tried. I didn't say anything. Han Jin hurriedly shook his head. Sunir took a deep breath, and Morrison's took 2 steps back. Then they turned around and walked out of the wooden shed. The whole process was very smooth. Sunir, Han Jin did not know what to say. He now understood that Sunir and Morrison's had already fought with the earthen bear, and it was because of the soft armor that Sunir was not hurt. As for the words that he had been thinking about, it meant that Sunir and the others had not given up yet. They were preparing to hunt the earthen bear again. I'm a hunter. In this forest, I'm not afraid of any challenge. On the contrary, I like this feeling. Sunir said calmly, Don't think too much. I didn't want to hunt the 2 earthen bears just for you. If I want to improve my strength, I have to go through the baptism of iron and blood. Fighting is the only way to break through the bottleneck. To be precise, I'm doing this for myself. You're an elf, right? Han Jin asked softly. My identity shouldn't be a secret to you. Sunir showed a smile. Didn't you say elves hate war? I'm an exception. Sunir paused for a moment. Actually, there are exceptions in every race. For example, you humans. 100 years ago, the Archmage Hyena was running around, asking the lords to stop the endless war. What he said is unforgettable even now. What is it? He said a lot, and it's not something that can be explained in a few words. However, the one that left the deepest impression on me is this one. Sunir's voice became serious. Let the powerless have strength, and let the pessimistic move forward. Han Jin could only shut his mouth when the topic suddenly changed. He knew too little about this world, and it was impossible for him to reach the level of philosophy. If he forced himself to continue the conversation, he would be exposed. Many elves think that humans are a kind of despicable, cruel, and greedy creatures. I can only say that those elves are too shallow. Sunir said slowly, Every race, including the goblins, will give birth to nobles or even enlighteners. They're the ones who lead their own race, or the whole world, to prosperity and strength. Han Jin hesitated for a moment. Don't you think that this topic is too profound for me to talk about. He suddenly felt like he was facing a female professor. He had met such people before when he was a detective. These kinds of people were always talking about the future of mankind and the balance of society. There was no room for him to interrupt. The problem was that Han Jin only wanted to absorb more and more energy. He was not interested in anything else. Sunir looked at Han Jin. After a while, she said, "Do you know how the Archmage Heine died?" Han Jin's face was full of helplessness. It was like they were talking about different things, and the donkey's lips were not on the horse's mouth. Because he only had the heart to change the world, but he didn't have the power to do so. Sunir gave the answer herself. Ahem. Sunir, I know. You respect the Archmage Heine a lot, but he has been dead for a long time. It has nothing to do with us, right? Han Jin looked at Sunir's face. Now I just want to know, why are you helping me? Because I'm curious. Sunir smiled. You have a talent that has never appeared before. I want to know how far you can go. Just curiosity. Yes, what do you think I want? Then, can you listen to me carefully for a while? Go ahead. Sunir, what do you think is our biggest advantage? Our advantage? Sunir thought seriously. We don't seem to have any advantage. It's time. Han Jin said helplessly. We're still young. We have a lot of time. There is nothing that can force us to take risks. Trust me, don't attack that earthen bear. Before, you didn't know my secret, but I was still confident in myself. Now that I have your help, I am even more confident. We don't need to rush into anything. You are very calm. Sunir smiled. Let me think about it. One more chapter in the afternoon. Chapter 23. When Han Jin walked out of the wooden shed with the help of Stillberg, 10 days had already passed. As the saying goes, it takes 100 days to recover from a serious injury. It was not easy for Han Jin to recover his ability to walk in 10 days. In these 10 days, many things had happened. The most important thing that had the greatest impact on the future was the fundamental change in their relationship. These 10 days could not be underestimated. If Han Jin was not injured and Chi Li's emotions had returned to normal, they would have chosen to leave and head for the Bite Man. But what would happen when they reached the Bite Man? It was hard to say what would happen to Sasu, but Sunir would not continue to stay with them. She wanted to find an answer for herself and for the elves. Obviously, Han Jin and Morrison's did not have a right to answer. Chi Li would also leave. She had her own problems to solve. In the future, if they had the chance to meet again, it would be unknown whether they would be friends or enemies. Sunir and Sasu would often engage in fierce arguments about the future of the world. Later, Chi Li would also join in. Sunir's identity was very clear. She was an elf from Wild Willow City and grew up under the influence of the elven civilization. Sasu was always wandering between cities and understood the suffering of the commoners and slaves. Chi Li, on the other hand, represented the privileged class of humans. In other words, the three of them had different statuses, and their views on life and the world were completely different. Just like the three kingdoms, they would always argue with each other, and no one would be able to convince the other. Sometimes, two of them would join forces to attack the other, and when the topic changed, the original alliance would quickly dissolve, and a new one would be formed. It was really fickle. However, their friendship gradually deepened as they quarreled. In fact, their argument was very childish. They couldn't even change a small town, let alone change the world and decide the future. However, it had to be admitted that it was the characteristic and privilege of a young man to criticize and encourage words. As the saying goes, newborn calves are not afraid of tigers. If even young men lost their vigor and drive, then the world was really hopeless. Moxink was the most boring of them all. As Han Jin had said, he only had some petty tricks, but didn't have any lofty ideals or thoughts. Of course, it was a lofty ideal to make the world peaceful, but compared with that, Moxink preferred to be a sword sage who could look down on the world. If there was a god who could fulfill one of his wishes unconditionally, he would definitely choose the latter without any hesitation. Seeing Sasu and Sunir sitting around the square rock in silence, Han Jin felt a little strange. He pointed at Morrison's and asked, "What's wrong with them? Aren't they always noisy at this time?" Hush. Morrison's put up his index finger. They just talked about Chi Li, and now Chi Li is sad. What's wrong? Han Jin frowned and asked. Morrison's briefly explained what had happened. According to Chi Li, she came to open a blacksmith shop in Radon Town, which was a family assessment. During this period, she would not receive any help from the family, and the initial capital would be fixed. The assessment period was 1 year, and the person who would be in charge of the family in the future would be determined. In fact, according to the convention, Chi Li should take the assessment 2 years later. Of course, she also understood that the reason why her family asked her to leave the Holy Crown City was to avoid someone. Han Jin and Morrison's already knew what had happened. Later, Chi Li suddenly received a letter from her family, and the sender was her father's old friend, the senior fighter Hoffman. In the letter, her father told her to leave Radon Town as soon as possible and never return to the Holy Crown City. Chi Li was inexperienced, so she could only guess in her heart, but could not make an accurate analysis. Sasu and Sunir made up for her shortcomings. Black Raven City and Depew City jointly attacked Dismark, and Dismark's request for help from Wild Willow City was rejected. Therefore, Dismark had only one choice left, which was to expand the army as fast as possible. The first thing to be solved was the military expenditure. Chi Li's family was one of the richest families in the Holy Crown City, so she became the first target of Dismark. However, due to some unpredictable considerations, Chi Li's family did not want to unite with Dismark by marriage, so they decided to let Chi Li leave the Holy Crown City to delay for some time. The problem was Dismark was in a critical situation. How could he have the energy and time to deal with a businessman? In the end, he used extreme means, which was also the origin of the letter. Although it was just a guess, it was a big blow to Keely. She couldn't find any other reason except for that. Han Jin fell into silence. After a long while, he slowly said, let's go, and have a seat. I won't go. They always talk about useless things. Morrison's shook his head. You. Han Jin was both angry and amused. Let's go. We should also discuss the next step. Hearing the footsteps behind him, Sasu turned his head and said in surprise, Raphael, why did you come out? Your wound. It's all right. Han Jin answered while sitting on a small square stone. Chi Li forced a smile, then lowered her head and said nothing. Sunir looked at Han Jin from head to toe. Are you really all right? Of course. Han Jin shook his arm hard to prove his health. We have stayed here long enough. Should we go somewhere else? Where do you want to go? Sunir was stunned. Anywhere is fine. At least we have to ask about what happened outside. Han Jin glanced around. What do you think? I'm fine with anything. Sasu said. Okay. Chi Li looked at Han Jin with grateful eyes. Even if Han Jin did not say it, she would have made this request. She was hesitant just now because Han Jin was injured, but now that Han Jin suggested it, it could not be better. Where should we go? There has to be a place, right? Sunir asked. Let's go to the 11th town. It is very prosperous, and I am more familiar with the situation there. Morrison scratched his head. The 11th town? That's a strange name. Han Jin said curiously. The Bite Man has a total of 4 acropolises, which are divided into north, south, east, and west. Under each acropolis, there are 4 towns, so there are a total of 16 towns, and all the towns are numbered with numbers. It seems that the leader of the Bite Man is a very smart and cautious person. Han Jin's heart skipped a beat. The Bite Man only has a leader, no leader, and the leader changes every 3 years. Sassa laughed. In fact, the Bite Man is controlled by the 4 leaders of the acropolises, and the leader always rotates among them. I see. Han Jin thought for a moment. Sunir, we should have a lot of harvest these days, right? Why? Are you afraid that I will be corrupt? Sunir laughed. No, I have to know what I'm doing. Sunir opened her space ring, and pieces of magic crystals appeared on the square stone one by one. But the magic crystals were not of high grade. All of them were level 4 or 5, and there were about 20 of them. Sasso, how much can these be sold for? More than 100 gold coins. If we meet someone who is in urgent need, we can sell them for a higher price. Chi Li said first. Sasu shrugged his shoulders. In fact, with Chi Li here, Han Jin's question was superfluous. It's enough. Han Jin breathed a sigh of relief. Now everyone was poor. Chili used to have some money, but it was all plundered by the traitor Viller. If she wanted to realize her wish, she had to rely on herself. What do you want to do? Sunir asked. You will know when the time comes. Han Jin squinted his eyes. If the war has already broken out in the Holy Crown City, maybe we can sell them for a higher price. Hee. Headache. It is a stupid mistake to write Han Jin as Anfi, and I have made this mistake several times. But, from another point of view, it also proves that I am very serious about writing, so the name Anfi has been deeply engraved in my mind. I remember when I first started to write Legend of the Assassin, I often wrote Qian Bewley as Anfi, but Qian Bewley is 3 characters, so I can immediately detect when I make a mistake. Now, I can only rely on you to remind me. Chapter 24. Indeed, Morrison's expression was very serious. He pointed the wooden stick in his hand at Stillberg. A calm lake can't train a capable sailor. A peaceful environment can't create a hero. So, if one day you become strong, the first person you have to thank is of course me, the one who once tortured you. But I want to learn magic. Stillberg was about to cry. He didn't know how many times he was hit in the butt, and it was still burning. He really didn't want to continue fighting with Morrison's, if that could be called a fight. Spineless. Morrison's curled his lips. He suddenly shouted, "Watch out!" The wooden stick in his hand was already stabbing out like lightning. Stillberg hurriedly used both hands to protect his butt. He didn't even want to use the wooden stick in his hand. However, Morrison's only needed to lightly flick the tip of the stick to deflect Stillberg's left hand. Then, with a bang, Stillberg was hit again. He was in so much pain that he jumped around on the spot. Stillberg is your man. Are you not going to do anything about it? Sassa laughed. That guy is a 6th-grade professional. How am I supposed to control him? Han Jin shook his head and continued with his work. What are you doing? Sassu curiously looked at Han Jin's hands. Han Jin's right hand was holding the table knife he borrowed from Sunir. His left hand was pressing down on a piece of gray paper. He was carefully carving something with the table knife. Soon, a 2-inch-long paperman was formed under the knife. Han Jin whispered a few words. At the same time, his index finger was drawing on the paperman. When everything was ready, he called out, "Stillberg, come here. I don't want to fight with you anymore. Young master is calling me." Stillberg was so happy that he cried. After saying that, he ran towards Han Jin as if he was running for his life. Han Jin placed the little paperman in Stillberg's palm and whispered a few words into his ear. Then, he patted Stillberg's shoulder and said, "Go." Stillberg stared blankly at Han Jin. Then, he gritted his teeth and ran back to pick up the wooden stick with his trembling hands. How boring. Morrison's had already lost interest in tormenting people and was walking towards Sunir. "Get back here," Stillberg shouted. With a puff, Stillberg's fearless expression made Chili laugh. Sunir first glanced at Han Jin, then looked at the arena with a faint smile. "Aya, you little brat." Morrison's was so angry that he laughed. He walked towards Stillberg step by step. "You're a 6th-grade professional. This is not fair to me." Stillberg was forced to take a few steps back. "We should change the method." "What method?" "I'll count to 3. If you can't beat me within 3 seconds, you lose." "Okay, Stillberg, pray for your ass." Morrison sneered. Wait a minute. Stillberg was so scared that he took a few steps back. "We should bet on something." "That's more interesting. What do you think we should bet on?" Morrison saw that Stillberg was so confident. He secretly looked at Han Jin, but Han Jin just sat there with a gentle smile on his face. He couldn't see anything strange. "If I lose, I'll call you Big Brother. If you lose, you'll have to call me Big Brother too," Stillberg shouted. "No problem." Morrison's heard that there was no real danger, so he agreed without hesitation. "One," Stillberg screamed and threw the paperman away. A tremor swept through everyone's heart. Then, a giant about 40 feet tall appeared out of thin air. It held a long stick that was thicker than Morrison's waist and smashed it down on Morrison's head. The moment the giant appeared, Chi Li's smile froze on her face. Sunir suddenly jumped up from the grass. Sasu also stared blankly and muttered, "Puppet, puppet spell." Morrison's was the most shocked. He didn't dare to block the attack and jumped back. "Stillberg, what are you doing? Keep counting," Hanjin shouted. In fact, he was only using the simplest spell. The giant looked scary, but it didn't have much fighting power. It would fall at the first touch. Its biggest use was to trick people who didn't know how to fight. Stillberg seemed to wake up from a dream. He screamed, too. Morrison's couldn't care less about Stillberg. He released his combat aura to the maximum and dodged the giant's attacks with all his might. The giant was more than 30 feet tall. Every time it swung its stick, it had the momentum of a tornado. Its movements were also very fast and fierce. Morrison's height only reached the giant's knees. No matter how he retreated or dodged, the giant could easily catch up to him with a single step. 3. Stillberg had already called out the winner. "Raphael, hurry up and put away that damn puppet." Morrison's roared, "Hurry up, otherwise I'll destroy your puppet." Sunir and the others looked at Hanjin. Hanjin's smile didn't change. The giant's attack power couldn't hurt Morrison's at all. Moreover, the energy it used couldn't be recovered. It was better to just watch the show. Morrison's saw that the giant was still chasing after him. He knew that this couldn't go on. He dodged sideways and ran towards the giant's sword that was stabbed into the ground. In fact, Morrison's was also a ruthless character. He was really angry at this moment. He couldn't care less about anything else. Moxink rolled on the ground and threw the stick at his back. Then he roared and threw the stick away. Then he pulled out his long sword from the ground and rushed towards the giant like a flash of light. Moxink rolled on the ground, and threw the stick away with a roar. Then he pulled out his long sword from the ground and rushed towards the giant like a flash of light. Morrison's eyes were as big as copper bells. The long sword in his hand emitted a cold light. When he was less than 5 meters away from the giant, the stick he threw hit the giant first. The aggressive giant disappeared in an instant, as if it had never appeared. Only those with good eyesight could see a piece of paper floating down from the sky. Losing his target, Moxink couldn't control his body and fell straight into the woods outside the ring. Just as he was about to fall into the bushes, he managed to stabilize himself and turned around to search for his target with his blank eyes. "What's this?" Sunir jumped into the field and picked up a piece of paper. "I don't know either." Hanjin stretched himself and replied faintly. In fact, he was very excited in his heart. There were 3 types of cultivation. The first was to purposely forge the body to become a saint. This was an external technique. The second was to use oneself as a cauldron to cultivate the primordial spirit. This was an internal technique. Hanjin had cultivated all 3 of them before, but he wasn't very proficient in any of them. Today, he spent more than 300 yuan of energy to make a commander's seal. He wanted to see what kind of power the Gate of Tao could exert here. He was about to reach the foundation establishment stage, so he had to decide what he should focus on in the future. 1 chapter in the afternoon. I won't say much in the future. From now on, at least 2 chapters a day. Chapter 25. Hanjin usually didn't swear, but when they arrived at the 11th town of the Bite Man after 5 days of trekking, Hanjin really couldn't control himself when he saw the scene in the town. He even suspected that he had come to a monster's paradise. He saw that some of the creatures had the head of a wolf, but their lower body was similar to that of a human. They walked upright like humans, and some of them were even holding tools for production or living. He saw that some of the creatures looked like uncivilized gorillas, but their skin was green, their bodies were strong, and their faces were ferocious. These were barely acceptable, but what kind of monster was the creature with the head of a human, but its lower body was connected to the body of a horse? Stillberg was as inexperienced as Hanjin. He was so scared that he didn't even dare to raise his head. By comparison, even Chi was much better than Hanjin and Stillberg. Sasu saw that Hanjin was a little nervous. He patted Morrison's shoulder with a smile and said, "Take them to the east. There's a Red River Hotel at the end of the road. The owner is my friend." Let's rest there today. What about you? What are you going to do? Morrison's asked. I'm going to inquire about the situation in the Holy Crown City. I'm going with you, Chile said hurriedly. Chile, look at you now. You'll definitely get into trouble. You'd better go with Morrison's. Don't worry. I'll tell you when I get the news. Chile bit her lips. She found that almost all the passers-by were focusing their eyes on her. Those pupils of different colors were clearly shooting out undisguised lust. Sasu, look around the town and see if there's a branch of Morgan and Company. If there is, tell the people inside that I've arrived. Your family's business group also has a branch here. I don't know about this place, but there must be branches in the 4 acropolises of the Bite Man. I see. Sasu nodded. Hanjin noticed the eyes of those monsters earlier than Chile. He felt a little uneasy. Morrison's, I'm now doubting whether it's right for us to come to the Bite Man. It's your first time seeing these half-orcs, isn't it? Morrison's laughed. It's okay. In fact, I was more nervous than you when I saw them for the first time. Hanjin shook his head slightly. He still felt very uncomfortable. According to the culture he inherited, there was a saying, those who are not of my race must have a different heart. And cultivators took the responsibility of killing monsters as their own. If he really had the ability to do so, he would have already started a massacre. At least, he would never let go of those monsters who kept provoking him with their eyes. Morrison's introduced to Hanjin in a low voice. Those over there were werewolves, half-orcs, barbarians, centaurs, cavemen, and so on. Then he comforted Hanjin. There are rules here. No one dares to mess around. You're just talking about the normal situation, Sunir said lightly. Yes, that's why we must keep a low profile. Morrison smiled awkwardly. In fact, it's the same in other places. I really miss Radon Town now. Hanjin sighed slightly. Although it's a bit chaotic here, there are still many opportunities. Morrison cheered up and laughed. Let's go to the Red River Hotel that Sassum mentioned. The group walked towards the east side of the town. After walking for a long time, they were about to leave the town when they saw a small hotel. Above the dilapidated door, there were a few crooked words, Red River Hotel. Moxink was the first one to push open the door, and then they went in one by one. The first floor of the hotel was supposed to be a dining area for guests, but there was no one there. A few chairs as old as the door were placed there, but they were clean and tidy. A young man about 23 or 24 years old was taking a nap behind the counter. Morrison's walked over and knocked on the counter. Hello, I'm Morrison's. Sasu asked us to come here. The young man opened his eyes. Sasu? He's back. Yes, he'll be here soon. I'm Michelle. Since you're Sasu's friends, you're also my friends. The young man stood up. Although his tone was polite and enthusiastic, his expression was very flat, which was comparable to Sunir's. Have a seat. Michelle, your business seems to be not so good. Morrison's tried to curry favor with him. I don't expect to make a fortune here. I'll do it if there's a business, but it doesn't matter if there's no business. Michelle shrugged. You're from the Holy Crown City, right? What do you want to eat? Well, we don't need to bother you. We'll eat outside. What? You think my place is too small? Michelle said unhappily. Maybe Sasu didn't tell you that I'm a first-class chef. Not to mention in the 11th town, even in the whole Bite Man, there are only a few who are better than me. No, you misunderstood us. Morrison's turned back and glanced at Hanjin. We eat too much, so? Eat too much. Michelle glanced around and fixed his eyes on Morrison's. Interesting, you're afraid of eating too much? Don't tell me you're going to eat for free. That's not it. Moxink scratched his head. Ho, I'm just kidding. Michelle laughed. I don't have many guests all year round. I'm so happy to have friends coming from afar. How can I take your money? Tell me, what do you want to eat? Michelle, I don't mean anything else. It's just we can't eat for free. Just do what you want. Morrison stammered. He did it for the sake of Michelle. Sasu didn't talk to you about me? No, Morrison said honestly. Sasu and I are best friends. Do you understand? Michelle laughed again. So, you don't have to be so courteous with me. Ha! Don't think that my hotel is small. You can eat and stay here for free for a year. I can still afford to feed you. Morrison's was stunned. Sunir and the others looked at Michelle sympathetically. Feed him for a year? Hanjin could eat as much as he wanted. Even if he ate the cheapest cassava, he could eat dozens of silver coins a day. Who could feed him for a year? Let's have something simple. We'll be satisfied with cassava, bread, and sausages, Sunir said. How can that kind of thing show off my cooking skills? Michelle frowned unhappily. Do you want to die? Morrison's turned around helplessly. Raphael, what do you want to eat? I want to eat grilled steak. Hanjin did not hold back. Among the home-cooked dishes, beef and mutton had the most energy. Since someone was treating him, he had to eat as much as he could. No problem. Michel snapped his fingers. Chapter 26. When Sasu arrived at the Red River Hotel, he saw a figure sneaking around the corner of the alley. He recognized that it was his old friend, Michel, and hurried over. Perhaps Michel was too focused, but he didn't hear the footsteps behind him. He only reacted when Sasu tapped him on the shoulder. Michel, what are you doing? Shoo! Michel raised his index finger and continued to look at the street. Then he suddenly turned back. Sasu, what? Don't you recognize me? Sasu was amused. Let me ask you, is that Morrison's really your friend? Michel grabbed Sasu's collar. Yes, those friends of yours are not good people, Michel said angrily. Michel, what's wrong? Sasu looked displeased. Don't slander others. You don't believe me? Umph. You wait here with me. Watch how I expose their true colors. Michel turned around again and looked at the street. At the same time, he gritted his teeth and muttered, Damn it, I was kind enough to entertain you, but you purposely harmed me. Just wait and see. Michel, what did they do to make you so angry? What did they do? The veins on Michel's forehead bulged. If they hate my cooking, they can say it out loud. How can they harm others like this? I made a plate of roast meat, and they threw it away. Then, they made me cook again. When I was done, they threw it away again, and then... Understand now. Sasu suddenly understood. He smiled bitterly. There's a guy called Raphael among them. He has a huge appetite. Actually, bullshit. Michel jumped up. I've already used hundreds of pounds of beef. The cellar is half empty. Sasu, you want to help them lie to me? You won't believe me even if I explain it to you. Let's go. I'll take you to them. Sasu grabbed Michel's hand. No. Michel shook Sasu off. I have to catch them. While the two were quarreling, a figure pulled open the door of the hotel and walked out quickly. It was Moxink, with a big plate in his hand. He walked to the opposite side of the street, threw all the things on the plate into the gutter, and then turned around and walked back to the hotel. Stop right there. Michel, who caught him in the act, seemed to have taken a stimulant and rushed out with a roar. Morrison's was shocked. Sasu, you're back. Michel, do you have a conscience? Despicable. Shameless. Michel roared angrily. What? Morrison's asked, confused. Michel's accumulated anger exploded. A string of words shot out of his mouth like arrows, condemning Morrison's and the others' unjust behavior. His voice was loud and fierce. Not only did it attract the attention of many neighbors, even Sunir, Chi Li, and the others in the hotel were alerted. Sasu pulled Michel hard. Michel turned around and said angrily, What? Sasu pointed at the gutter. Michel looked in and was stunned. Other than some household garbage, there was also a pile of bones half a foot high. The bones were so clean and tidy. There was not even a scrap of meat left. Obviously, the person who made them was very serious. Let's go. Sasu sighed. He put his arm around Michel's shoulder and walked toward the hotel. Michel was still in a daze. He let Sasu do whatever he wanted and did not resist. In the hotel, Hanjin was sitting on a chair. He looked around as if he was waiting for something. He was still holding the knife and fork tightly in his hands. Raphael, are you full? Sasu asked with a bitter smile. I'm still a little hungry. Hanjin's knife and fork clinked lightly, making a pleasant sound. Michel's face had already turned ashen. He was not stupid. When he saw the pile of bones, he understood that these people did not harm his culinary skills. On the contrary, they admired his culinary skills. Didn't they see how clean it was? However, if he had a choice, he would rather not have such admiration. Sasu, Your friend is very nice. He's very passionate. He's going to feed us for a year, Morrison said with a strange smile. Michelle's face turned pale. He was the one who said that. He could not deny it. Moreover, he had always been a man of honor. He could not deny it. Don't bully an honest man, okay? Sasu glared at Morrison's. He then walked over to Sunir. I don't have much money on me. What about you? Sunir opened her spatial ring and threw a dozen gold coins on the table. This is all I have. Sasu grabbed the gold coins and handed them to Michelle. Here, take them. No, I can't take your money. Michelle refused. They're just joking with you. Do you really want to feed us? Sasu shook his head. Believe it or not, they'll make you a pauper in 10 days. Hee, we're just joking with you. Don't mind us. Morrison's laughed. Just take them. Then go get me some food. They're all full, but I haven't eaten yet. Sasu grabbed Michelle's hand and stuffed the gold coins into it. I'm not full, Hanjin said solemnly as he raised his knife. Sasu rolled his eyes. Michelle's face turned red. In the end, he put the gold coins away. There's no more food in the cellar. I'll go out and buy some for you. Okay, then go. Sasu patted Michelle's shoulder with a smile. Michelle walked a few steps and stopped. He looked at Hanjin as if he was looking at a monster. How much more can you eat? I can eat as much as you have. Hanjin said seriously. Michelle was defeated and fled the hotel in a hurry. Chili had been waiting for him for a long time. Finally, she couldn't help asking, Sasu, have you heard anything? No news from the Holy Crown City. The army of Lord Molishin of Depew City has blocked the border. But I've seen people from Morgan and Company and told them that you're in the Red River Hotel. It won't take long for them to send people here. Chi Li's face showed a joyful expression. Hanjin suddenly said, Chi Li, are you ready? Ready? What for? You don't have a token. They may not recognize you. What if they don't recognize you as the lady of the Morgan family? Even if they recognize you, I don't think you have the right to control them, do you? Hanjin said lightly. What's more, you don't know whether they're loyal or not. You don't know their character, and you can't guess their attitude towards you. Now that the Morgan family has gone through a drastic change, who dares to say they're still willing to serve you? Chi Li's joy faded little by little. Then what should I do? Wait until they come, Hanjin said softly. Chapter 27. People from Morgan and Company didn't show up until it was dark. At last, Chi Li forced a smile, saying that she was tired and wanted to go to bed. Then she went to the second floor under the guidance of Michelle. Morrison's, Sesu, and others looked at each other, but they couldn't persuade her. After all, it was Chi Li's family affair. However, they looked at Hanjin with admiration, including the experienced and knowledgeable Sesu. They all subconsciously thought that as long as they spread the news that Chi Li came to the 11th town, people from Morgan and Company would definitely come to welcome their Mississippi. However, things were much more complicated than they imagined. I'm going to see Chi Li. Sunir stood up. You should go to bed early too. You have to go to the market tomorrow. Tomorrow, I may sleep a little longer. Don't disturb me. Hanjin also stood up lazily. Today was the time to build a small foundation, and he didn't want to be disturbed by anyone. After entering his room, Hanjin put a piece of second-grade fire element magic crystal on the table. He had asked for it from Sunir during dinner. He didn't have a space ring, so he could only leave it in Sunir's place for safekeeping. Then he closed the door, walked to the bed, and slowly sat on it. He had the experience of building a foundation in another world, so he didn't need to worry about anything. What made him nervous was the strange country of the Bite Man. Hanjin knew something about the Bite Man by listening to their chatter. It was much more chaotic than the Holy Crown City. The lord of the Holy Crown City was Dismark, who had already established his ruling position. He was well organized in terms of government orders and public order. No matter what the external environment was like, the internal environment was very stable. There was no opposition. The nobles supported Dismark, and the civilians and slaves obeyed his rule. The Bite Man was different. The four acropolises in the east, west, south, and north were always scheming against each other, and there were often bloody cases. Their attitude to the outside world was even more erratic. One day, they stood on the side of the Holy Crown City and the Wild Willow City, and the next day, they made friends with the Dark Camp, such as the Black Raven City. As a result, the capital of the Bite Man earned a very ironic nickname, the City of Treachery. In this generation, the lords such as Dismark and Zagund no longer trusted the Bite Man. It could be said that as long as there was a winner in the war between them, the next target to be destroyed would be the Bite Man. The reason why they allowed the Bite Man to develop freely was that they had no time to be distracted by their powerful enemies. As for cooperation and alliance, it was out of the question. In fact, the lords of the other acropolises were also aware of the danger. If they wanted to enhance the fighting power of the Bite Man, they only had two ways: to unite closely with each other, or to fight to the death, and let the last survivor unite the power of the Bite Man. The former was very difficult, while the latter was not only very difficult, but also very costly. However, human nature was unpredictable. The lords unanimously agreed that the latter was the best way to save the Bite Man. How to describe it? Was it to move forward in the face of difficulties? Or was it to know that there was a tiger in the mountain, but to go to the tiger's mountain? The lords had their own concerns. In the so-called open struggle and secret struggle, they often solved the disputes and contradictions with words. If they couldn't solve the problem, they would use some tricks in the dark, but they would never allow the contradiction to escalate to the point of breaking up in public. In Radon Town, Han Jin had been trying hard to absorb energy, but he didn't feel any urgency. However, in the Bite Man, those monsters were wild and unrestrained. What Sisu, Michelle, and others told him made Han Jin feel a sense of crisis. In troubled times, people's lives were as cheap as grass. Through thousands of years of history, he was very clear about the law of survival in troubled times. Han Jin sat on the bed with his legs crossed and his palms facing the sky. With each breath, the energy in his body expanded and contracted rhythmically. It had been half a month since he was injured by Sunir. With the help of Sunir, who hunted magical beasts for him all day, his energy was now close to 10,000 yuan. He was 100% sure that he could complete the minor foundation building. The minor foundation building was to open the minor heavenly cycle. It didn't require any skills. Moreover, Han Jin had practiced to the point of cultivating qi and refining spirit. For him, opening the minor heavenly cycle was just a piece of cake if he had enough energy. With the collision of energy, Han Jin felt a stinging pain in his tailbone. He didn't increase the strength of the collision, nor did he deliberately control the energy. He just let nature take its course. In fact, at this time, the most important thing was to keep nature. If he deliberately controlled it, it would be very easy to cause deviation. An hour passed, and then another hour passed. Han Jin was still patiently waiting. The stinging pain in his tailbone gradually turned into heat. Following that, Han Jin's body couldn't help but tremble. A magma-like torrent broke through the obstruction of his tailbone and rushed up the due meridian. Han Jin took a deep breath. At this time, he deliberately controlled it. It was only for a moment. When the energy rushed to the Jiaji Pass, it paused for a moment. Then, it suddenly exploded, broke through the obstruction of the Jiaji Pass, and rushed to the Yuzhen Pass. Han Jin's back felt itchy. That was the sign of blood and qi. His Baihui acupoint was also constantly throbbing. However, all of this couldn't distract Han Jin. He once again sank into the meditative state and kept nature. The most difficult part of the minor circulatory cycle was to break through the Yuzhen Pass. The Yuzhen Pass was also known as the Iron Pass. After the Yuzhen Pass was the Sea of Marrow, which was also the most important residence of the hidden spirit. If there was a deviation at this time, it would cause irreversible damage. Taoist internal arts divided the human body into 3 cauldrons. The lower dantian was the place of calmness. When a minor circulatory cycle was opened, the energy would be transferred to the middle dantian. The middle dantian was where the qi was stored. In the end, the energy would be transferred to the upper dantian. How far one could walk on the path of cultivation depended on whether one could safely open the minor circulatory cycle. Although it wasn't difficult for Han Jin, this was the foundation of the foundation. There couldn't be any deviation. Han Jin displayed extreme patience. He wasn't in a hurry. He was calm and didn't deliberately control the energy. He also didn't forget to control the energy. These two seemed contradictory, but in fact they weren't. If a mirror was placed on the ground and a bird flew across the sky, it would definitely leave an image in the mirror. In terms of Taoist techniques, the image was the pure, true meaning. If one tried to control the bird and didn't pay attention to the image, it was equivalent to giving up the true meaning and becoming obsessed. If one didn't control the bird at all and the bird flew away, the image would disappear. Naturally, the true meaning would be lost. The most important part of the minor circulatory cycle was to stop one's thoughts between forgetting and not forgetting. After an unknown amount of time, the Baihui acupoint was beating more and more violently. Suddenly, Han Jin's eyes lit up. The energy flow had already rushed through the Yuzhen Pass. A feeling of limpness and bliss entered his mind. It was like being enlightened, like bathing in a hot spring. The tip of Han Jin's tongue moved up, guiding the energy flow down the 12 floors and finally gathering in the sea of qi. After continuously operating the minor circulatory cycle for 36 times, Han Jin slowly opened his eyes. As he expected, the minor foundation was successfully completed. Now, it was time to move on to the next step. Chapter 28. Han Jin slowly picked up the fire element magic crystal, pondered for a moment, and put it into his mouth. The energy in the magic crystal was unstable, and with a little guidance, the energy gushed out like a flood. However, Han Jin was well prepared. His willpower had also improved after he reached the foundation establishment stage. His body was like a sponge that could never be saturated, easily absorbing all the energy that could be absorbed. The magic crystal contained about 90 yuan of energy, and the rest was pure fire element. Han Jin had suffered a loss from the dark element last time, so this time he was on high alert. Just as he was trying to expel the fire element from his body, an idea suddenly flashed through his mind. Could it be that the fire element was really useless? Han Jin's hand gradually turned red and even faintly glowed. He forced all the fire element into his Laogong acupoint, then took out a piece of white paper and carefully drew on it. The fire element turned into countless faintly visible stars that fell on the paper, and an unprecedented talisman gradually took shape. Han Jin carefully examined it for a moment and nodded with satisfaction. He then got off the bed, walked to the window, and opened it. After all, this world was unfamiliar, and he could only slowly explore everything by himself. If he wanted to understand the power of the talisman, he had to do his own experiments. Not only did it require patience, it also required time. He didn't know when, but the sky was already bright, but there were still no pedestrians on the street. Han Jin set his target on a blue stone on the side of the street and raised his hand to throw the talisman. As soon as the talisman left his hand, it turned into a dazzling, scorching flame, mixed with an ear-piercing screech, and hit the blue stone directly. Boom! A loud sound was heard, and in the splashing flame, the blue stone was hit into pieces. Han Jin never thought that an ordinary fire talisman could be so powerful. He was stunned for a moment before he reacted. He hurriedly closed the window, and in a few strides, he jumped onto the bed. "What's going on?" Sunir's voice came. "Is it magic? But I didn't feel any magic waves." Sasu was puzzled. "It's over there. Go down and take a look." Sunir had already found the target of the magic attack. Han Jin lay motionless on the bed with a slight smile on his face. He finally regained his confidence. If even a small fire talisman could shock him, then what kind of power would the 3 true fires, 5 true fires, red lotus calamity fire, black heavenly karmic fire, and so on unleash? This was just a fire talisman. What about a thunder talisman? Perhaps it was because he had completed the minor foundation establishment, or perhaps it was because he had grasped hope and grasped the future. But this time, Han Jin slept exceptionally well. It was not until noon that he opened his eyes in satisfaction. When he walked down to the first floor, Morrison's Sunier and the others were discussing something. When they saw Hanjin, they all smiled and greeted Hanjin. Only Michel was different. His happy face suddenly turned pale. He stood up and walked to the kitchen. Michel was running a small inn, and there was only one innkeeper and one waiter. It would be hard work for him. What are you guys talking about? Hanjin asked with a smile. Young master, yesterday a tree demon broke into the town. It was a Class 8 holy beast. I heard that it killed many people. In the end, a group of mercenaries and the security team worked together to kill the tree demon. Class 8 holy beast? What about the magic crystal? Hanjin asked without hesitation. Now, whenever someone mentioned holy beasts in front of him, he would always subconsciously ask about the magic crystal. We didn't do anything. What does the magic crystal have to do with us? Morrison's laughed. At this moment, the street became lively. Stillberg ran out to take a look. He turned around and waved to Hanjin. Young master, come and see. That is the tree demon. They dragged the tree demon here. They want to drag the body of the tree demon to the edge of the town to scare off the other holy beasts. Cessation frowned. I don't know what's going on these days. Many holy animals have left the Teresham Mountains and intruded into villages and towns. Didn't we encounter dozens of human-faced eagles and earth bears? It's not normal. Hanjin walked to the gate. He just glanced at it and lost interest. The so-called tree demon turned out to be a wood monster. This kind of thing was very difficult to eat, and he couldn't speed up. His current appetite was already shocking. If he held a piece of wood and kept eating, it would be shameful. In addition, the bodies of holy beasts were very tough. Take the human-faced eagle, for example. After a long time of roasting, the meat was still difficult to chew, let alone a Class 8 holy beast. Maybe the energy absorbed was not enough to make up for the loss of teeth. Hanjin shook his head and walked back. But after 2 steps, he was stunned again. He suddenly felt that he had missed something. Hanjin turned around very slowly and stared at the body of the tree demon without blinking. After a while, he took out 3 gold coins with trembling fingers. These are all he had. Morrison's, go and buy the tree demon. Morrison's, who was drinking water, spat out a rainbow. Then he opened his eyes wide and shouted, Are you serious? You want to eat the tree demon? Sunier and the others looked at Hanjin at the same time. Everyone's eyes were very complicated. Don't talk nonsense. Go. I need it. Hanjin was anxious. Morrison's looked at Hanjin, then stood up without saying a word. He grabbed the gold coins from Hanjin's hand and strode out. The tree demon's magic crystal had already been dug out, so the body was useless. Morrison's haggled for a long time and finally bought the tree demon for 10 silver coins. Morrison's dragged the tree demon into the inn, then stood aside and looked at Hanjin with interest. Hanjin was walking in circles around the tree demon. His sparkling eyes and his constantly rubbing hands showed how excited he was. Hanjin had enough reason to be excited. The wood of the tree demon was very good. The aura it emitted was even comparable to that of a 1,000-year-old peach wood. The power of a commander seal was directly proportional to the material of the talisman. A commander seal made of paper would of course collapse with a touch, but a commander seal made of a 1,000-year-old peach wood would be thousands of times more powerful. Lend me your sword. Hanjin stretched out his hand. Morrison's did not say anything and handed the sword over. Hanjin stepped on the tree demon's trunk and swung the sword down heavily. With a bang, the tree demon was unharmed, but the sword in Hanjin's hand bounced up high, as if it was going to fly away with the wind. Hanjin smiled and said, Good. The sturdier the tree demon was, the more powerful the commander seal would be. What are you doing? Morrison's yelled. Hanjin ignored Morrison's and swung the sword down continuously. He swung the sword 5 or 6 times in a row, but only a few white marks were left on the tree demon's body. My sword. Morrison's could not stand it anymore. He stepped forward and snatched the sword. My young master, what do you want to do? Can I do it? Can I do it? I need a piece of wood this long and thick. Hanjin gestured with his hands. You want to make a puppet? Sunier suddenly stood up. Chapter 29. Yes. Hanjin nodded. But the puppet you make is too weak, Sasa said. Huh. Hanjin laughed. How can a puppet made from paper be the same as one made from a dryad? Sasu and Sunir's eyes suddenly lit up. Morrison's was even more excited. He waved his hand and said, "Get out of the way." After that, he released his combat aura and swung his greatsword at the dryad. With a loud bang, a 3-inch deep sword mark appeared on the body of the treeman. Although Moxing's strength was much stronger than Han Jin's after releasing his strength of fighting, this was the best he could do. Morrison's raised his long sword again. At this moment, Sunir suddenly said, "Wait a minute, have you thought about how to make a puppet?" Han Jin's brain reacted quickly. He immediately understood what Sunir meant. He couldn't help but look disappointed. The dryad's body was so tough. How long would it take to carve it out with a small knife? "Let me try." Sunir slowly walked over. She squatted in front of the dryad and took out a dark green pearl from her space ring. Then, she placed it on the dryad's corpse. The dark green pearl emitted a green light, reflecting the dryad's light green color. The withered body seemed to be filled with vitality. The cut that Han Jin and Morrison's left on the dryad's corpse was healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Slowly, green sprouts began to grow on the dryad's body. They grew longer and longer until they became tender green branches. "It's done." Sunir stood up and handed the dark green pearl to Han Jin. "I'll lend this to you for the time being." Sunir emphasized the word "for the time being." Obviously, this pearl was very important to her. Yes, Han Jin took the bead, and a refreshing feeling came from his fingertips. He couldn't help but be stunned. Morrison swung his sword in a probing manner. The Trent's body was no longer as tough as before. The slash easily sliced the Treant in half. "You better hurry up," Sunir said softly. Moxing found that the twigs on the treeman's body showed signs of withering. Without hesitation, he brandished his sword and chopped out more than 20 pieces of wood. Of course, he was not a machine, and his calculation ability was not so good. The pieces of wood were of different sizes and were uneven. When the green glow on the Trent's body completely disappeared, it regained its previous toughness. Morrison's tried to slash the Treant a few more times, but he couldn't do anything to it. Morrison stopped and looked at Sunir. "That should be enough, right?" Sunir asked. "Well, it's about time." Han Jin nodded. "I'm ready. Can we go now?" A low voice sounded. Han Jin turned around and saw Chi Li standing at the stairs. She looked very sad. It seemed like she still hadn't recovered from yesterday's shock. "Okay," Sunir replied. "Where are you going?" "Chi Li and I are going to find Morgan and company. We have to at least figure out what they're trying to do." Sunir said slowly, "Sasu, sell our magic crystals later. We're almost out of money." "Okay." Sasu paused. "Sell them all?" "Yes. He doesn't need magic crystals above grade 4 anyway. When he needs them, we can go hunt monsters." "Him?" Sasu looked at Han Jin. Among them, only Han Jin was crazy about magic crystals. He didn't even let go of the Black Raven's magic crystals. "Let's go," Sunir said to Chi Li. She knew she shouldn't have said that, so she tried to change the topic. "Then what should I do?" Morrison's asked. "You stay. See if there's anything you can help Raphael with." At this moment, Michelle dragged a metal bucket out of the kitchen. Steam was still coming out of the bucket. "Raphael, this is yours." Han Jin looked at it. Why is it cassava?" "We voted. Before we make a fortune, you can only eat cassava." Sunir smiled as she walked to the door. "That's not fair. I haven't voted yet." "We all agreed unanimously, so your vote is meaningless now." Cessation gloated. "I'll let it go today. I can eat less in the future, but I want to eat the same thing as you." Han Jin shrugged. In fact, he knew his appetite was a burden to everyone. He was just joking when he said it was unfair. Moreover, he could already absorb energy from magic crystals, so he didn't rely on food a lot. Of course, he didn't need to be modest when there was enough food. However, he couldn't afford it, so he had to make do. "We're also eating cassava today," Michelle said unhappily. He didn't know Han Jin well enough and thought that Han Jin was just a lazy person who liked to eat and work. Han Jin was speechless, and his face was slightly red. In fact, in terms of value, Even if Sunir and the others ate fish and meat every day, it couldn't compare to Han Jin's consumption of cassava. It was hard to say whether they would be able to share happiness in the future, but Sunir and the others had already done so. Sunir and Chi Li went to find people from Morgan and Company. Sasu took the magic crystals to the market, and Han Jin didn't rush to eat. He sat on a chair and began to carve seriously. The requirements to make a commander seal with wood were very strict and complicated. After the commander seal was released, it would only be a projection that was magnified tens or hundreds of times. Therefore, the four limbs had to be clearly carved. If one's cultivation was high enough, it wouldn't be so complicated. Casting beans into soldiers was the highest level of the commander's seal, and it also depicted the power of the commander's seal. The problem was that Han Jin's cultivation was still too low. In fact, Han Jin didn't have much interest in the commander's seal in that world. He even thought that the commander's seal was the most useless of the 36 strange techniques. If he met an expert, he could burn you down with a fire. If he met a weak person, he could knock them down with a thunder curse. Why would he need to release the commander's seal? It was a technique that was neither too high nor too low. In the end, the commander's seal was at most used to scare people. But now, Han Jin needed something that could scare people. Han Jin's master once said that Han Jin was smart, patient, able to endure loneliness, good at reflection, and has a bright future. Han Jin sat quietly on a chair, his body motionless. Only his wrist was moving briskly, and a small table knife in his hand turned into a stream of light. His eyes were calm and gentle, and his expression was calm and smiling. It was said that a man looked the best when he was serious. At this moment, Han Jin was just like that. Morrison's didn't like to be quiet, but he was affected by Han Jin's charm. He stared blankly at Han Jin's every move and didn't make any trouble. Time always passed very quickly at times like this. When the sun was about to set, Sunir and Chi Li walked in one after another. Their expressions weren't good. Obviously, things are going bad. Sunir wanted to say something, but when she saw Morrison's silly expression, she couldn't help but follow Morrison's gaze. Her heart suddenly skipped a beat. Some people thought that appearance was insignificant. What was important was the beauty of the heart. These words were a little sour. At this moment, Han Jin gave people a feeling like a spring breeze. His concentration, his smile, and his calmness were all shining points. If his appearance was ugly, then his appeal would be greatly reduced. Chapter 30. Han Jin put the commander's seal on the table, looked up, and asked with a smile, "What's wrong with you?" "Nothing." Sunir strode to the table. Her movements were a little hurried. No one knew if she wanted to hide something or if she was interested in the commander's seal made by Han Jin. She looked at the four almost identical wooden puppets and pointed at one of them. "I feel that this thing contains a strange power. Well, this is the finished product. The others are still a step away." Han Jin nodded. "Can you show us?" Sunir asked. "It's too wasteful." Han Jin shook his head. It only took about 200 yuan of energy to make a paper talisman, but the wooden commander seal took more than 600 yuan of energy. That was why he only made one commander seal. "Let's try it." "Did we wait in vain?" Morrison's cried. "In a few days. I'm still not very skilled. It takes me 2 or 3 days to make a puppet." Han Jin smiled and changed the topic. "By the way, how are you? Did you find the people from Morgan and Company?" Chi Li's expression became gloomy again. Sunir said softly, "No. I heard that they left the 11th town overnight." Han Jin was silent for a moment and said slowly, "Chi Li, don't worry. We'll help you." Chi Li looked at Han Jin and forced a smile. Although Han Jin's promise was a little empty, she was already very satisfied. At least she didn't have nothing. Han Jin reached out and pointed at the iron bucket. Stillberg hurriedly pulled it over. Han Jin picked up a piece of cassava and ate it slowly. "It's already cold, right? I'll heat it up for you again," Michelle said. "It's okay." Han Jin smiled. Just then, the door was pushed open and Sasu came in. His face was livid, his eyes were burning with anger, and his lips were trembling slightly. Obviously, he was very angry. Everyone was surprised. Among them, Hanjin had the best temper. He was as gentle as jade and always had a smile on his face, followed by cessation. He was very polite and never got angry even when Moxink teased him. What happened? Hanjin asked curiously. Sasu glanced around and said, I'm sorry. What happened? Those magic crystals, they were confiscated. Sasu lowered his head and didn't dare to look at others. Confiscated? Who the F***CK dares to confiscate our things? Morrison's jumped up. It's the security team. You're even afraid of the trash of the security team? Moxink said angrily. Morrison's, calm down. Hanjin yelled. Although Morrison's didn't mean it, pointing the finger at Sasu would greatly irritate Sasu and affect the unity of the team. Sasu's face was getting paler and paler. Cessation, what's going on? Tell me in detail, Sunir said gently. It's not just the security team. There are also some garrison soldiers with them. Sasu paused. I really don't have a choice. Garrison soldiers? Why do they confiscate our things? They're in cahoots. Sasu smiled bitterly. When I was selling magic crystals in the market, a merchant came to negotiate with me. He wanted to buy all of our magic crystals for 50 gold coins. Could I sell it? When he saw that I refused, he threatened me and told me to sell it to him immediately. Otherwise, I wouldn't get anything. I ignored him. In the end, he came with the security team and some garrison soldiers. The security team asked me to pay 20 gold coins as tax. Where am I supposed to find 20 gold coins? In the end, the merchant you were talking about is about 50 years old. He's skinny and has a big beard, right? Michel suddenly interrupted. Yes, you know him? Sasu was surprised. Then he talked to you while negotiating the price. He talked about all kinds of things, right? Yes. You fell for it. Michel sighed. His name is George. He's a bad guy. He used to do things like this all the time. He has a purpose for chatting with you. He wants to know your background and whether you know any big shots in town. When he thinks that you're easy to bully, he starts to threaten you. If you refuse his request, he will immediately bring the security team over. Last year, a small merchant from another town was tricked by George. In the end, George even sent him to prison. I heard that merchant committed suicide in prison. Sasu was stunned. He was only a mage and a bard. As the saying went, different professions make different worlds. He had never done business, so naturally, he didn't understand the mystery. Besides, he knew that everyone was in need of money, so he wanted to make a deal. The other party was very friendly and took the initiative to chat with him, so he treated him with sincerity. Michel, if you know him, can you help us ask for mercy? Sunir asked. It's useless. George's son-in-law is Mayor Rupper. I'm nothing in his eyes. Michel smiled bitterly. Besides, in the end, the security team and the garrison were sent. George even wanted to give them a share. Do you think George would spit out the meat he ate and then use his own money to reward the security team and the garrison? Morrison's turned around and walked out with his long sword. Sunir hurriedly shouted, Morrison, stop! What? Morrison's was angry. What are you going to do? It's none of your business. Morrison's was very aggressive today. He didn't care about anyone's face. If you want to die in the 11th town, then go ahead, Hanjin said lightly. You mean, we're not going to do anything? Morrison's University's voice replied. What he said to Hanjin more than half a month ago was true. He really felt that Hanjin was very smart and kind, so he wanted to accompany Hanjin and take care of each other. Now, only Hanjin could persuade him. If you go, can you get her things back? Morrison's was silent, but his expression was still very stubborn. Since you can't get it back, what's the point of you going? Don't you want to live? Hanjin sneered. If you don't want to live, just say it. I can't help you, but Sunir should be able to, right? Hanjin's words were a bit insidious. Morrison's was so angry that his face turned red. Yes, Morrison's. We can't mess with them, Michel said hurriedly. You can't rush things like revenge. Hanjin's tone slowed down. Moreover, revenge must be done cleanly. Not only must you defeat the enemy, but you must also step on his foot so that he can never rise again. If you're not sure, it's better to do nothing and be bitten black and blue all over. What's the point? Then what do you think we should do? Morrison's University asked softly. Let's eat and sleep. We'll talk about tomorrow's things tomorrow. But I feel uncomfortable holding it. Who doesn't feel uncomfortable? Han Jin asked lightly. And the one who feels the most uncomfortable is not you, but Sasu. Morrison's could not help but look at Sasu. Sasu showed a bitter smile. In fact, Han Jin was right. Others only felt the pain of loss, but Sasu personally experienced the humiliation. Han Jin picked up a piece of cassava and swallowed it in a few bites. Then, he grabbed a piece of wood and started to carve seriously as if nothing had happened. Don't hide it if you have a friend who can recommend you. Give me some confidence. Chapter 31. In the early morning, Han Jin and the others left the 11th town quietly. Last night, Sasu mentioned that he had said some harsh words before he left. His harsh words only made the security team and soldiers laugh at him, and at the same time, laid an unpredictable foreshadowing. Han Jin laughed and criticized Sasu, saying that he was immature, Michelle was a little timid, and he complained about it. George liked to do things that were ruthless. What if he came to make trouble again? Finally, Han Jin made the decision to leave the 11th town and go to the West City first. On the one hand, they could avoid George, and on the other hand, they could help Chi Li. There was a branch of Morgan and Company in the West City. When the top management of Morgan and Company was in crisis, whether they still had control over the branches in each city, and whether the internal structure of Morgan and Company could stand the test, they would know through this trip to the West City. Except for Michelle, everyone was in good spirits. Although Morrison's was a little impatient, he was also a man who could pick up and let go. Sasu had rich experience and was good at self-regulation, so no one mentioned yesterday's incident again. Of course, although they didn't mention it, the thorn had been deeply buried in their hearts. Avoiding it was not forgetting it. By noon, Han Jin felt a little tired. He had gone to bed very late last night and had absorbed the energy of 2 second-grade magic crystals. He had also used the pure elements to make a fire charm and a thunder charm respectively. There was only one fire charm of the wooden giant, and the energy consumption of 600 yuan was too much for him to bear. There happened to be an open errand in front of them. Han Jin asked for everyone's opinion and took the lead to walk to the inn. The so-called inn was actually a snack shop set up by the villagers nearby. It didn't even have proper tables and chairs. A few piles of stones were placed next to the tree stump. As for the food provided, it was even coarser. Bread made of coarse wheat, and it cost more than 10 copper coins to fill a broken bowl with water from the nearby river. But they just wanted to take a rest. No one wanted to eat and drink here, so there was no need to argue. Han Jin and the others had only been sitting for a short while when a cloud of dust suddenly rose in the distance. A team of night riders was running towards them at an extremely fast speed. Sasu glanced at it, and his face immediately changed. Han Jin noticed the change in Sasu and asked softly, "What's wrong?" "Yesterday, at the market, they were there." "What?" Michelle said in a panic. "Let's go." "Why are you panicking?" Morrison's glared at Michelle. Han Jin pondered for a moment, but before he could say anything, the night had already arrived. They jumped off their horses and sat beside the tree stumps, completely ignoring Han Jin and the others. It seemed that they also came here to rest. One of the night riders turned his head and saw Sasu. He blinked his eyes and said something to the knight beside him. Then, many of the night riders turned around and looked at Sasu. Then, there was a roar of laughter. Obviously, Sasu was not the only one who remembered them. They also remembered Sasu, or rather, remembered Sasu's harsh words. Han Jin's expression did not change. He lowered his voice and asked, "Sunir, are you confident?" Sunir was stunned. There's a magician beside their leader. If we can take care of that magician first, then there won't be a problem. Are we going to do it? Morrison's showed an excited expression. No, just in case. It's best if we don't cause any trouble. Han Jin shook his head slightly. Let's rest for a while more before we set off. Han Jin was not the only one who did not want to cause any trouble. The night riders did not want to cause any trouble either. After a while, they forgot about Sasu and started chatting among themselves. However, when a group of men gathered together, the topic would never leave women. Soon, waves of obscenities were heard by Han Jin and the others. One of the night riders even imitated the sound of a woman moaning in bed, which made the night riders laugh even louder. Sunir frowned. She was trying her best to control herself, but Chi Li could not stand it anymore. The things that the night riders were talking about were too disgusting. She turned around and glared at the night riders. When the night riders were walking up the hill, Chi Li's back was facing them, so they did not notice Chi Li at all. Now that Chi Li turned around, the night riders were stunned. One of the night riders whispered something into his leader's ear and then strode toward Han Jin. "Dear miss, our general wants to make friends with you. Would you like to have a drink with him?" The night rider's words were polite, but his actions were rude. He reached out to grab Chi Li's arm as he spoke. Being rude was a habit. As the night riders of the West City Legion, they represented the country's machinery and power. They were even the embodiment of justice. No one had ever dared to go against them, unless they offended a superior of a different faction. "What are you doing? Get out of my way!" Chi Li screamed. Morrison's reached out to grab the hilt of his sword, but Han Jin stepped on Morrison's sword with his foot. He signaled Morrison's to stay put with his eyes. The night rider was embarrassed. When he heard the jeers of his companions, his eyes flashed, and he was about to pull out his whip. "Sir, my sister is young and immature. Please forgive her." Han Jin stood up with a smile. "How about this? I'll persuade her and then send her over. Is that okay?" The night rider looked at Han Jin. He felt that something was missing. Since he had regained his dignity, he did not want to go too far. He snorted and walked back. In fact, what Han Jin lacked was respect for the superior. Unfortunately, he did not think about it. Han Jin sat down again and put his hand on Chi Li's shoulder. It seemed that he was talking to Chi Li. "You guys are ready." "I knew it." Morrison smiled. Are you crazy?" Michelle said with a trembling voice. "Do you want us to hand over Chi Li?" Han Jin asked. "It's broad daylight. They just want Miss Chi Li to drink with them." "No. Everyone, don't be impulsive. Actually, there's only one reason to move forward. There are 100 reasons to retreat." Han Jin looked deeply at Michelle. "I'm curious. Why do people find 100 reasons to prove that they are not cowards, but never a single reason to prove that they are brave?" In terms of nature, Han Jin's attack power was not strong, but his elasticity was terrifying. In other words, no one could oppress him. Once Han Jin was enraged, there would be no such thing as spare people where possible in his dictionary. The result would be a fight to the death. Sunir and the others focused their attention on Han Jin. Yes, Han Jin did not say anything like, "I'd rather die than submit," or "as long as I'm still alive." In fact, his words were very rational, but they could arouse people's fighting spirit. Something called fearlessness boiled in their blood. "Can you do it?" "I'll go," Sasu whispered. He knew what Han Jin wanted to do. He wanted to help Sunir take care of the magician first. "Don't worry." Han Jin smiled and whispered something in Chi Li's ear. Chapter 32. Han Jin pulled Chi Li and walked towards those knights with a smile. Chi Li followed Han Jin for a few steps, but lowered her head and didn't move. Han Jin didn't find that Chi Li didn't follow him until he reached those knights. He waved his hand and said, "What are you thinking? Come here, don't make His Excellency angry." Chi Li bit her lips tightly, with tears in her eyes. Her face was full of grievances and fear, which made her look very pitiful. In the Holy Crown City, Chi Li was a well-known lady. Her beauty and her family's wealth were always talked about. But the Holy Crown City was much more prosperous than the West City of the Bite Man. The former was the capital, while the latter was only a citadel. Those knights had never seen a beauty comparable to Chi Li, so they all stared at her. "Come here." Han Jin seemed to be really angry, and then he smiled apologetically to the leader and said, "Sir, please don't be offended. My sister is a bit stubborn." The leader nodded to Han Jin in a friendly way. He really wanted to promote this sensible young man as a reward. Unfortunately, this young man didn't have Do Chi, nor did he have magic waves. He was just a good-for-nothing. Chili stamped her feet with tears in her eyes. She twisted her small waist and walked forward. Although she couldn't control her emotions and got herself into trouble, it was just because her previous living environment was too comfortable and comfortable, which made her a spoiled girl. But it didn't mean that she was a fool. Now she put her heart into acting, and her acting was very good. She fully expressed the helplessness and sadness of a young girl who bowed her head under the power and violence. The knights, including the leader, laughed so hard that they couldn't close their mouths. They totally forgot that there was a good-for-nothing behind them. Han Jin turned his wrist, and a fire charm flew out of his hand. The distance between him and the magician was so close that the moment the fire was formed, the fire charm had already hit the magician's head. With a bang, countless pieces of flesh and blood splashed in all directions. The headless corpse twitched for a few times and then fell down. Han Jin retreated as fast as he could and threw out the wooden commander's charm. With a flash of green light, a 10-meter-tall giant appeared out of nowhere and punched the knight leader. Morrison's unsheathed his long sword and rushed toward the knight in front of him with a roar. With a whoosh, a black arrow flew past his neck. Before Morrison's could understand what was going on, the knight in front of him had already fallen on his back. A black arrow was still trembling in the bridge of his nose. Then a second arrow, and a third arrow. Sunir's smooth blonde hair danced in the wind, and her light green eyes emitted a sharp light. Every time she pulled back her long arm, a knight in front of her would fall to the ground. Sasu also cast a spell. Han Jin's retreating speed suddenly increased, and Morrison's was the next to speed up. Although this was the first time they had worked together in a battle, their tacit understanding was not bad. The person in the most danger was Han Jin. First helping Han Jin escape, and then speeding up Morrison's rescue, Sasua's reaction was not wrong. The leader had already unsheathed his sword and blocked the giant's fist. First, there was a loud bang, followed by a series of explosions. The giant trembled violently in the midst of the explosions. People could clearly see that the rings of light caused by the explosions were shuttling back and forth around its body. Then, the leader swung his sword, and the 3-meter-tall giant was sent flying like a straw, somersaulting more than 10 meters away. Fighting technique. Morrison's roared. He was reminding Han Jin to be careful. The leader actually ignored the lives of his subordinates and the threat of the opposing magicians and archers to chase after Han Jin. It was obvious how much he hated Han Jin. Although Han Jin was already affected by the acceleration, his retreating speed was still far slower than the leader's. Furthermore, he needed the support of his companions, so he did not dare to leave the battle. He could only move in an arc, and the distance between the two was rapidly shrinking. Han Jin flipped his right hand, and a ball of black light shot out towards the leader's face. The leader snorted coldly. He did not care about this attack at all. The sword in his hand had already extended to more than 2 meters long, and he pointed it at Han Jin from afar. There was an explosion. The sudden appearance of a black curtain of light wrapped tightly around the leader. He staggered slightly, and then quickly rushed out of the curtain of light. Han Jin's body turned, and he changed the direction of his escape. With a flick of his wrist, another ball of black light flew out from his hand. The leader of the night did not dare to be careless. The tip of his sword met the ball of black light. With a boom, the black light exploded on the tip of his sword. Han Jin ran forward a few steps and waved his right hand behind him. 3 balls of black light shot towards the leader of the night in a triangular formation. The classification of Taoism was very complicated, and there were strict restrictions. A self-cultivator who practiced internal techniques could not practice external techniques at the same time. There were too many conflicts between the techniques. However, Han Jin was different. He could even be said to be a master of miscellaneous arts. He had dabbled in internal arts, external arts, and Taoist arts. Even if it was the 36 arts of strange arts that were difficult to understand, he could still describe them. Of course, he was not proficient in any of them because what he practiced was energy and there was no conflict between them. All of the arts were used to accumulate or consume energy for some purpose. No matter what other self-cultivators thought of Han Jin, Han Jin always believed that he had the ability to laugh and laugh. To put it bluntly, he was competing with those who practiced internal techniques to see whose fist was harder, those who practiced external techniques to see who had more Taoist techniques to see who had more Taoist techniques, and those who practiced Taoist techniques to see who had a deeper realm. Han Jin had even come into contact with things that self-cultivators looked down upon, such as the Chung boxing, Tai Chi, and hidden weapons. Although he had only come into contact with them for a short period of time, and had even played with them for 2 weeks before giving up, Han Jin had already grasped the correct basic skills. His master had never interfered with him. In his master's words, all techniques were one. When one's cultivation was really close to the highest realm, there was no difference between all techniques. The leader of the knights swung his sword, and a wave of sword light streaked across the sky. The 3 magic crystals that Han Jin had thrown out with a special technique were all crushed into powder, and the exploding black light curtain was also crushed into pieces. However, the distance between him and Han Jin had increased by a few meters. While Han Jin was desperately fleeing, Morrison's and the others had the upper hand. Of the remaining knights, only 2 were truly worthy of the title of knight. The rest were just a bunch of high-grade warriors. Morrison's waved his huge sword and rampaged through the crowd. Sunir's arrows never missed, and Sasu kept releasing magic. The 3 of them worked together and killed most of the knights in the blink of an eye. In the end, only 2 true knights were still barely holding on. Seeing that the situation was not good, the leader of the night pointed his long sword at the distant sky. The tip of the sword seemed to be inlaid with a pearl, shining brighter and brighter until it was hard to open one's eyes. Thunderblast! With a roar, a white ball of light about 1 meter in diameter shot out and chased after Han Jin. Seeing that the white ball of light was about to swallow Han Jin, a giant rushed up from the side and opened his arms in front of Han Jin. With a bang, the giant flew back as if it had been hit by a cannonball. Han Jin was hit directly and couldn't help but fall back 7 or 8 meters before rolling on the ground. He felt a sweet taste in his throat and saw stars in front of his eyes. His hands and legs were a little weak. He struggled twice but couldn't get up. Chapter 33. Morrison's opponent had already suffered several injuries. If he put in a little more effort, he would be able to end the battle. However, when he saw that Han Jin was in danger, Morrison's did not have the heart to continue fighting. He roared angrily and rushed towards the leader of the knights. Sunir also changed her target. This time, her movements were extremely slow, as if she had the will but not the strength. The bowstring was pulled back bit by bit. Countless small cracks appeared on the green thumb ring on her index finger, and the air became inexplicably heavy. The leader of the knights wanted to rush over and finish off Han Jin, but he suddenly turned around and stared straight at Sunir. He held his long sword in front of his chest and looked very serious. Morrison's paused for a moment. Then he rushed towards the leader of the knights. He raised his great sword above his head and swung it down with all his might. The leader of the knights sneered. He was a little worried about the female archer in front of him. As for Morrison's, he did not care about them at all. The difference between a swordsman and a fighter was too big. Fighting technique. Morrison's roared. Galaxy. The leader of the knights raised his sword and thrust it forward. A 2-meter-long sword light was aimed at Morrison's chest. Morrison's shouts could only fool a fool. As a fighter, he could tell if his opponent was able to use a fighting technique even if he closed his eyes. Morrison's hurriedly pulled back his sword to block the attack. The moment his sword came into contact with the enemy's sword light, a series of explosions sounded. His body could not help but tremble. A black arrow silently brushed past Morrison's body and flew towards the leader of the knights. The leader of the knights snorted and swung his sword. With a loud bang, the arrow was shattered into pieces by the sword light. The leader of the knights was forced back 7 or 8 steps before he could stabilize himself. A golden light appeared on the ground, and turned into a whirlpool of quicksand. This time, the leader of the Knight's expression finally changed. He desperately tried to move his legs, trying to get out of the whirlpool of quicksand. However, every time he tried to pull his leg out, his other leg would sink deeper into the sand. Even though the whirlpool of quicksand was boiling and spewing out waves of sand, his movement speed was extremely slow. Although casting a Tier 5 spell had consumed a lot of his mana, Sasu still tried his best to concentrate and recited another spell. Regardless of whether it was a small-scale battle or a large-scale one, the power of magic was always the deciding factor. This was also the reason why Sunir wanted to be the first to kill the enemy's magician. Morrison's chuckled. If not for the fear of losing his sword in the quicksand, he would have thrown his sword out. However, Sunir had no qualms about that. She continued to shoot arrow after arrow at the leader of the Knights. When a person was in danger, no one would be willing to wait for death. The leader of the Knights let out a thunderous roar. He struggled and waved his sword to block Sunir's arrows. Cobweb. Sasu released another Tier 5 spell. The leader of the Knights struggled even slower. In an instant, his legs were submerged in the quicksand. The leader of the Knights let out a miserable cry. Despair and panic made him lose his composure. He simply threw away his sword and used his hands to struggle in the quicksand. Sunir's thumb ring finally shattered. At the same time, her arrow had already shot out. It traveled dozens of meters at an extremely fast speed and disappeared into the chest of the leader of the Knights. The leader of the Knights froze for a moment before he was swallowed by the quicksand. Hanjin had already recovered some of his strength. He climbed up from the ground and quietly looked at Sasu with flickering eyes. He couldn't deny that Sasu played an irreplaceable role in killing the Knights in the front and besieging the leader of the Knights from the back. He was the absolute main force. Morrison's sneak attack was only because he had the upper hand. If Sasu hadn't cast a buff on Morrison's, he wouldn't have been able to escape the pursuit of the leader of the Knights. Playing with magic? Hanjin blinked his eyes. At this time, a low groan attracted everyone's attention. The battle just now was too fast. Morrison's and others only wanted to defeat their opponents in the shortest time. They didn't have the energy to distinguish whether the enemy was dead or alive. The groan came from a seriously injured knight. Hanjin turned around and walked over. He picked up a long sword from the ground. The knight noticed that someone was approaching and his eyes showed a pleading look. Hanjin didn't even look at him. He waved his sword and blood gushed out from the knight's neck. Even if he could survive, there was no way for him to make sound. Hanjin circled around and stabbed each of the knights who were still alive or dead. He was so relaxed that he looked like a nobleman who was waving his folding fan while on an excursion. Morrison's, you said he never left Radon town? Sunir asked in a low voice. Yes. Sunir glanced at Morrison's and didn't want to talk with him anymore. This slow, big guy didn't know what she meant at all. Hanjin began to do his favorite work, plundering the spoils. He also called Stillberg to be his assistant. Sunir walked slowly towards him. Our prophet, what should we do next? There's a big mountain over there. We can hide in the mountain and no one can find us. Hanjin hesitated and shouted. What are you looking at? Why don't you go? The villagers who ran the inn were all scared out of their wits. They didn't dare to move from the beginning to the end. Seeing that Hanjin had let them go, they swarmed back into the village. Don't go to the West City? What about Chile? Morrison's asked. If you can catch up with them and kill them all, then we will go to the West City. Hanjin said lightly. Morrison scratched his head and smiled bitterly. If they tried to insult him or hurt him, he wouldn't mind to draw his sword. But in the face of several innocent villagers, he couldn't bear to kill them anyway. Actually, we don't need to go. They know I'm here and deliberately. It's useless to go. Chile said hesitantly. Her face was very pale. She used to live in a greenhouse and didn't have the chance to see such a bloody scene. It was not easy for her not to throw up on the spot. The loot was beyond everyone's expectation. The total value of all kinds of coins was more than 70 gold coins. Cessation's face was flushed with excitement, as it was the first time he owned his own wand. There were more than 20 magic crystals on the ground, most of which were 4th grade or 5th grade magic crystals. Surprisingly, the water blue magic crystal was among them. The feeling of returning it to its rightful owner made Cessation very happy. What about the horses? Just leave them here? Sunir laughed. Everyone laughed. Hanjin had such a big appetite that he would take the horses with him. Although horse meat was rough, it was still food. That's great. We can ride them, and we'll be faster. Didn't you say you were going to hide in the mountains? How are you going to ride them? No, we're going back to the 11th town. Going back to do what? Sassu asked in surprise. Since we're going to do it, let's do it thoroughly. Hanjin smiled. Michelle, what about you? Are you coming with us or going by yourself? Hanjin didn't like Michelle. Not only was he timid, but he was also stupid when everyone was fighting for their lives. What was this? Do I have a choice now? Michelle smiled bitterly. Then you can come with us, Sassu said hurriedly. He noticed some contempt in Hanjin's eyes, but no matter what, Michelle was his friend. You haven't said what you're going to do. Thoroughly? You'll know when we get back. Hanjin looked at the magic crystals on the ground and smiled. Don't you think there's a very promising profession? Chapter 34. Although the situation on the continent was very chaotic, the public security in each main city was still okay. As the saying goes, thieves will be punished, and thieves will be punished. Under the strict punishment system, ordinary civilians didn't dare to do bad things, and no one was willing to become a slave. As for the privileged aristocrats, no matter what they did, it was far beyond the scope of public security. The so-called public security was only for civilians and slaves. The highest power in each city was firmly in the hands of the lords. In this world, strength was the only standard to test everything. Every lord wasn't alone. There were countless professionals united around them. The power of the lords could easily destroy the other Acropolis, and even the resistance of all the villages and towns. The only thing that could really threaten the lords was the other lords. As for the oppressed classes, such as civilians and slaves, there was definitely dissatisfaction, but the system of this world gave the oppressed classes a way out and a channel to vent their dissatisfaction. Want to become a privileged class? Cultivate diligently. When you have outstanding strength, the privileged class will gladly open their doors to welcome you. For stability and to ensure that their privileges can be safely passed down, the privileged class doesn't care about having another partner to share the spoils with. If you're bullied your whole life, it's because you are incompetent. Why can others become excellent professionals, but you can't? You deserve to be bullied. If you want to resist, it's your fault. You must be firmly defeated. However, the situation in Bite Man was a bit special because there was no supreme ruler here. The 4 castellans of the Acropolis were always scheming against each other. What they wanted to prevent was large-scale bloody conflicts. As for small-scale fights, they had never stopped. Even the castellans themselves were the ones who instigated the fights behind the scenes, which laid the foundation for the chaos in Bite Man. Therefore, the security team of the Bite Man was the busiest, most tired, most numerous, and most dangerous security team. Even in the middle of the night, they still insisted on patrolling. In an alley of the 11th town, a head suddenly popped out and quietly observed the security team in the distance. When the security team had turned into another street, the figure made a gesture to the back. Sunir jumped onto the wall and carefully observed her surroundings. Her glossy blonde hair was still very eye-catching in the dark night. Hanjin had argued with Sunir many times about this issue. He insisted that Sunir tie up her hair and cover it with a black cloth, but Sunir refused for an unknown reason. Are we really going to do this? Michelle asked in the darkness. Do you think we still have a way out? Sassu said softly. Don't worry. George only has a few warriors protecting him. His guard captain is just a high-grade swordsman. It won't be a problem, Hanjin said calmly. He's just a high-tier swordsman. Morrison's replied unhappily. What do you mean? Your self-esteem is quite strong. Hanjin couldn't help but laugh. The sentence just now was indeed a suspicion of scolding the locust tree. You. Morrison's was so angry that his teeth were itching. But considering what they had to do now, he could only hold it in for the time being. Can you all shut up? Sunir's cold voice came down from above. Although her hearing was very good, the people below were talking nonsense, which caused a great disturbance to her. Everyone fell into silence. Hanjin suddenly felt that after the battle during the day, except for Michelle, their confidence had increased a lot. They could even defeat a fighter, so why would they worry about a little swordsman? Now, they were not only excited, but also arrogant, which was not a good sign. Sunir quietly moved along the wall and hid behind a tree. Then she slowly took out the longbow on her back and aimed in a direction. She loosened her fingers, and an arrow flew out silently. Then it sent a safe signal. Sasu, you, Michelle, and Stillberg stay here and be ready to help us, Hanjin said softly. Okay, don't worry. Sasu nodded. He was a magician, so it was not suitable for a sneak attack like this. Once he used magic, it would alert the others. Also, George's son-in-law, Mayor Lapel, was a high-tier swordsman. If Lapel came with the security team, they would be in trouble. Morrison's jumped lightly and grabbed the edge of the wall. Although he was tall, his movements were very agile. He quietly flipped over the wall and then reached down with one hand. Hanjin tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and used Morrison's pull to jump on top of the wall. Then the two of them approached Sunir, one in front and one behind. Perhaps George had never thought that anyone would dare to attack him, so the defense in the yard was very lax. The three of them jumped off the wall and walked for more than 30 meters, but they did not see anyone. Morrison's, who was walking in the middle, had just turned a corner when he suddenly touched something wet. He was startled. He looked carefully and saw a person sitting in the hollow of the rockery. There was a black arrow sticking out of his neck. Unlucky, Morrison's mumbled to himself. He reached out his hand to the body and wiped it hard. Hanjin followed. He looked at the body and then back at the wall in the distance. He could not help but whisper, "This is a blind spot." Morrison smiled mysteriously. He lowered his voice and said, "Eight." "Eight what?" Hanjin did not understand. Morrison's did not answer. He quickly caught up with Sunir. They walked through the entire outer yard without any hindrance. After passing through the corner gate, they arrived at the inner yard, where George and his wives rested. Morrison's leaned against the corner gate and looked inside for a moment. He whispered, "This is the place that the kid mentioned. But George has so many wives. How do we know where he is? We can't look for him room by room, right?" Sunir looked back at Hanjin. Hanjin replied softly, "George is wherever there are guards." Sunir put her index finger in front of her lips and listened for a moment. Then she pointed to the left. The three of them followed the path forward. George's life must have been very simple. God knew what he was doing with his money. He did not even have many oil lamps, let alone magic lamps. Not to mention the outer yard, there were only 2 places in the entire inner yard that had a few oil lamps. At the end of the path was a very spacious yard. Under the light of the lamps, they could clearly see 4 guards gathered in front of the corner gate. They were discussing something in low voices. Sunir led them here because she heard the guards talking. "What should we do?" Sunir whispered. The grass in front of them was very spacious. They could not reach it at all. "Pretend to be a woman and lure them here," Morrison's whispered into Hanjin's ear. Sunir almost laughed out loud. This clown, he could joke around at any time. However, she soon stopped laughing because Hanjin was looking at her. Chapter 35. The night was long. Hanjin and the other 2 lay in the bushes and waited quietly. Hanjin had rejected Morrison's rude request, and Sunir was not willing to sacrifice anything to tempt anyone. In the end, the 3 of them could only wait for their chance. In fact, Hanjin had at least 100 ways to deal with the guards, but there was one condition. He could cast spells at will. Without energy, everything was just empty talk. Sigh. If only we had a thief. Morrison sighed softly. Morrison's, you've said this at least 10 times. Why are you acting like a woman? Hanjin, who was lying in the middle, replied. What's wrong with being a woman? Sunir suddenly interrupted. No, nothing. Morrison's covered his mouth and laughed secretly to prevent himself from making too much noise and alerting the guards. Hanjin was angry. Morrison's, we're doing something big. Can't you be more serious? What big thing? Morrison sighed again. Maybe we'll have waited for nothing and then go back with our tails between our legs. While they were talking, two guards suddenly left the courtyard and walked along the wall to a corner. After a while, they disappeared into the bushes. Hanjin became alert and looked at Sunir. Sunir listened carefully for a moment and nodded. She was confident that she could kill the remaining two guards quietly. Hanjin and Morrison's crawled in the direction of the other two guards. When they were in position, Sunir quietly propped herself up and drew her longbow. The first arrow hit the temple of the guard on the left. The arrow pierced through the bone and came out from the other side. With a thud, the arrow pierced deeply into the wall and nailed the guard to the wall. The other guard heard the sound and quickly turned around. When he saw the terrible scene, he was about to scream when an arrow shot into his mouth. Sunir's arrow was too powerful and too fast. The guard's upper body was suddenly bent backward. The arrow pierced through his upper jaw and the back of his head, connecting him to the ground. His body was bent into a bow. His legs kicked randomly a few times, and then he stopped moving. At this time, the other two guards walked back while talking and laughing. It seemed that they had gone to relieve themselves. When they walked past the corner, Morrison's came up from behind them. Although Morrison's couldn't release his combat energy, his movements were still very fast. His long sword cut through the air like lightning. The guard who was standing at the back suddenly froze. Morrison's sword had already pierced through his neck. Morrison's sword was very wide. The guard's head was almost chopped off. Blood spurted out. Hanjin pounced with a longsword. However, the opponent he chose had already turned around. His hand was already on the hilt of his sword. In the next moment, a bloody hole as thick as a cup appeared between the guard's eyebrows. Before Hanjin could cut down the guard, he was sprayed with blood. As a matter of fact, Hanjin liked cleanliness very much. Although only half of his face was splashed with blood due to the angle, it still made him feel very uncomfortable. He couldn't help but wipe his face, but the bloody smell became even stronger. You're getting more and more handsome. I like it. Morrison's laughed. Hanjin was expressionless. No one would be able to laugh at a time like this. If he thought about it carefully, maybe there was some brain matter mixed in with the blood. It was better not to think about it. Sunir jumped a few times and landed lightly in front of the small courtyard. She looked at Hanjin. Her eyes were very calm. No one could tell if she was purposely torturing Hanjin to punish him for looking down on women, or if she just wanted to kill the enemy first and didn't care about anything else. Done laughing, Hanjin said calmly, Yes, let's go in. Morrison's nodded. Hanjin slowly walked over and patted Morrison's on the shoulder. Then, he suddenly wiped Morrison's face and strode forward. What are you doing? Morrison's roared angrily. They were not professional assassins. To be precise, they were just a mob. Of course, they didn't have any organization or discipline. However, they still remembered their mission. Otherwise, if Morrison's roared without restraint, it would be enough to wake everyone in the courtyard. It's nothing. I'm just finding a balance. I feel much better now. Hanjin said as he glanced at Sunir. I'll remember this. Let's wait and see. Morrison's followed Hanjin angrily. Hanjin couldn't find fault with Sunir, and he couldn't find fault with Hanjin either. He could only endure. As for what he was thinking, it should be similar to Hanjin's. The next thing was simple. George didn't expect that someone would dare to touch a tiger's, but, after all, his son-in-law was the mayor of the 11th town and a high-grade fighter. He was very discerning. He wouldn't provoke powerful people. Those he provoked were people he could bully without any worries. After knocking out the 4 maids outside, they stepped into the bedroom. George and a woman about 20 years old were sleeping in each other's arms. Because it was almost dawn, Hanjin's action was a little rough. He patted the woman's lips. When the woman just opened her eyes, he cut her neck with his palm. From a physiological point of view, people could be knocked out in their sleep. But watching the opponent pass out could give people a sense of security. After a whole pot of water was poured, George struggled to open his eyes. Then he saw the shining sword in front of his chest. At that time, his face turned pale with fright. When he woke up in the middle of the night, he suddenly saw two more murderers in the room. The murderers were still holding sharp weapons in their hands. It was really too scary. What was even more terrifying was that the two murderers' faces were still smeared with fresh blood. Two, sirs, George said with a trembling voice. We have no money, so we came to borrow some money from you. Han Jin came straight to the point. He was full of hooliganism. Yes. George hurriedly nodded and pointed at the small cabinet beside the bed. Morrison's didn't hesitate. He poured the things in the small cabinet on the bed. Most of them were jewelry, and they were all for women. Not enough, Han Jin said softly. My lord, I lost money in the last business. My family. Han Jin's eyes moved down and fell on George's middle finger. There was a very simple ring there. George's face changed greatly. He smiled and pulled down his sleeve, trying to cover his hand. In fact, it would have been better if he didn't cover it. Han Jin immediately remembered the thing on Sunir's hand. He grabbed the bedsheet and waved his sword gently. Then he threw the cloth to George and said, Stuff it into your mouth. It's better to stuff it full. Chapter 36. After George put the cloth in his mouth obediently, Han Jin grabbed George's hair and dragged him off the bed. Then, he drew a few lines in the air with his finger, and a talisman made of countless light spots appeared. Han Jin used the charm of spirit refreshment, which only consumed a few dozen yuan of energy. Just as Morrison's and George were looking at the talisman curiously, Han Jin waved his hand, and the talisman flew through the air and landed on George's face. George suddenly felt that his spirit and strength were rejuvenated. If someone wasn't holding him down, he would have jumped up and shouted wildly to vent his excitement. This is far from enough. Han Jin pointed at the jewelry on the bed and smiled. Do you understand what I mean? George looked at Han Jin timidly. He grabbed the cloth in his mouth and tried to pull it out. Then, he could explain his difficulties to Han Jin. Han Jin flipped his sword and pressed George's hand down. Don't pull the cloth out, or I'll kill you. George was stunned. What did he mean? He couldn't speak at all. How could he answer Han Jin's question? Han Jin stepped out and stomped on George's ankle. With a wave of his sword, George's big toe on his left foot flew a few feet away. Blood spurted out from the wound on the toe with every heartbeat. George's face twisted in an instant. It was said that the 10 fingers were connected to the heart. In fact, the toe was also connected to the heart. He was in so much pain that tears and snot flowed down his face. His right foot kicked Han Jin's leg with all his might. However, his strength was limited. Han Jin's leg was as immovable as steel. In the end, George reached out his hand and tried to grab Han Jin's leg. Morrison's walked over and grabbed George's hair. Han Jin extended his sword and rubbed it on the wound on George's left foot. He said coldly, Not enough. After saying that, he swung his sword and the remaining toes left George's body. Blood gushed out. George's chest heaved up and down violently like a bellows. He was in so much pain that he almost fainted, but he just couldn't. It could be said that ever since he was young, he had never been as spirited as he was now. His senses had also become very sharp, but this brought him even more pain. Han Jin used his sword to pat George's right leg that was kicking wildly. Morrison's extended his leg and stepped on George's right leg. Han Jin moved his sword to George's right toe and said coldly, Not enough. A few cloth bags and a dozen magic crystals appeared out of thin air and landed on George's legs. George whimpered pitifully, as if he was trying to gain Han Jin's sympathy. Han Jin didn't look at those things and said coldly, I said, Not enough. With a flash of sword light, George leaped like a fish on its deathbed. Unfortunately, his legs were fixed and he could not jump up at all. His eyes were wide open, as if they were about to roll out of their sockets. He was on the verge of collapse. Not enough. Han Jin swung his sword and cut off another 4 of George's toes. He then moved his sword to George's ankle. The next time he said it was not enough, he would cut off one of George's legs. Like magic, countless rings of light flashed in the air. Cloth bags and magic crystals fell like raindrops and buried half of George's body in an instant. Han Jin's expression didn't change. Not enough. George's body suddenly stiffened and his eyes turned white. Then his head slowly drooped down and his body went limp. Not sure if it was because he was scared or if it was because he had exceeded his limit, but this time he finally fainted as he wished. Morrison's touched the tip of George's nose. He's not dead yet. You're too ruthless, but I don't think he can take out anything else. Yes. Han Jin nodded and walked to the bed. He pulled the bedsheet with force and said, "Wrap everything up." At this time, Sunir walked in from outside. Seeing the small mountain of treasures, she couldn't help but be stunned. Not a small harvest. Well, it's beyond my expectations. Han Jin bent down and took the ring off George's finger. He put it in front of his eyes and carefully observed it. Morrison's picked up a few bags and threw them on the bedsheet. He suddenly thought of something. "Sunir, is there still room in your spatial ring?" "There's still half, but I don't think it can fit all of them." Sunir's gaze fell on Han Jin. "What about this guy? Let him live." Han Jin smiled. "Let him live?" Morrison's was stunned. "After we hide for a while, we can come find him again. Maybe he can surprise us again." "Come find him again? You really—" Morrison's smiled bitterly. "If you really want this spatial ring, you have to kill him," Sunir said lightly. "Why?" Han Jin asked in surprise. "It's hard to explain in a few words. I'll tell you later." Han Jin straightened his long sword and thrust it down. The tip of the sword had already pierced George's throat. He wanted to keep George alive. What would a robbed merchant do? Disheartened or crazily collecting wealth? George's son-in-law was the mayor of the 11th town. He had a backer, so he would definitely choose the latter. When they came out of the mountain, George should have accumulated a fortune again. But for the spatial ring, Han Jin couldn't care less. Soon, most of the treasures were put into the spatial ring by Sunir. There were a dozen bags left, so Morrison's had to carry them. The three of them looked at each other and walked out in a single file. Just as Sunir and Morrison's no longer believed in Han Jin's past, Han Jin was also guessing the past of Sunir and Morrison's. Some things could not be seen through words, but through actions, they could be seen through. The three of them were more or less cold-blooded. In other words, they were all people with stories, attacking the night and sneaking into George's house. In just one day, their hands were stained with blood. Han Jin was still smiling. Morrison's was still carefree. Sunir was always indifferent, no matter whether the enemy deserved to die or not, no matter how angry they were. If they didn't have a complicated past, they would never be able to do this. At this moment, they had a deeper understanding of each other. But this understanding could not be said out loud. They could only keep it in their hearts. When they came out of the wall, Sasu complained anxiously. "Why did you come out so late? You're making me anxious to death." "Let's go," Han Jin said softly. "Let's go to the Red River Hotel to pick up Chi Li." It was always very dark before dawn. Even the security team was a little slack. A group of murderers quietly left the 11th town, found the horses tied in the woods, and galloped into the dark. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.